getting the story, being the first, being the best. Breaking the News continues the story of television journalism. Through the turbulence of war, the collapse of the Soviet Union, to the dawn of the digital age, with new rules.
Times have changed.
New players.
We were stuffed.
A new era.
We put them out and we got them right.
Breaking the News, television journalism unmasked, at these times on BBC World.
I knew what I believed in, and I believed in Godot.
My first piece of direction was whispered in my ear, "Don't bend over."
Tim, darling, I shall call you. It isn't that I'm an idiotic theatrical, you see. It has simply to do with the fact that I am senile.
A new guest every day in the Hardtalk interview. After the news on BBC World. This is BBC World. You're watching BBC Newsdesk with the latest international news and analysis.
The United States holds up a global treaty banning landmines. President Clinton defends his country's position. Final negotiations on a global ban on landmines will resume in Oslo in a few hours' time, after a one-day delay requested by the United States. Delegates to the conference are close to agreement, but the Americans want a 9-year delay before it takes effect.
And from the newsroom, today's other main stories: strong calls for reform as the UN General Assembly opens its annual session, but some third world countries object. And a breakthrough in negotiations over the Western Sahara. The people are to decide their future in a referendum.
Also in this programme, we'll have business news, weather, and 4 litres of frozen blood cast in the shape of the artist's head. Just one of the shockers at London's latest art sensation. Hello and welcome to BBC Newsdesk. President Clinton claims to be the first world leader to have called for a global ban on landmines. Now the United States is the main obstacle. For the past 24 hours, an international conference called to agree a ban has been suspended, while America engaged in intense diplomacy to try to secure special treaty exemptions. America's main concern is security on the Korean Peninsula, where mines are a key part of South Korea's defenses. The United States is also demanding a 9-year delay in the implementation of the treaty, exemption for its new generation of smart mines, and a clause allowing an opt-out for countries under attack. The Americans have yet to say whether they will refuse to sign the treaty if they do not get their way. But they're likely to come under strong pressure to back down when the Landmines Conference resumes in Oslo in a few hours' time. Jim Fish reports.
President Clinton's intervention followed a day and a night of telephone diplomacy with Canada and with Oslo to broker a last-ditch compromise. Instead of the immediate and total ban being demanded, the United States wants a 9-year delay because it believes landmines are vital to the defense of South Korea.
With the single exception of Korea, everyone in the world recognizes that Korea is a special problem because of the number of North Korean troops that are very close to Seoul. And we have been working with the people in Oslo to try to get an extended period of time to deal with that.
Washington also wants to be allowed to use anti-personnel and anti-tank mines together as defensive weapons.
We have another day or so to try to work through this. The United States would like to be a signatory to this agreement, but I have to be sure that we can fulfill our responsibilities and protect our troops.
The delay has caused some dismay in Oslo, where delegates of the 100 or so countries at the conference fear a watering down of the comprehensive treaty they're seeking. At the same time, there's little chance of getting countries like Russia and China to sign up without the Americans on board. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, a priceless crusader for the cause, with her visits to Bosnia and Angola, has increased the public pressure for a ban and left Washington isolated. But millions of mines remain active long after the end of the conflicts for which they were laid. It will require more hard work in the field and at the negotiating table before the world can call time on these deadly tools of war. Jim Fish, BBC News.
Our defence correspondent, Jonathan Marcus, is at the Landmines Conference in Oslo. He's on the line now. Jonathan, will there be an agreement today?
Well, I'm not sure it'll be today. It could well be, but there will certainly be an agreement this week in Oslo. The only question is whether it will be a treaty that the United States is ready to sign.
But if they do sign it, will the treaty be worth having?
Well, this is the great debate here. There are the purists who say it's much better to have as tight and restrictive a treaty as possible, with or without the Americans. And there are those who say that clearly this is only, in a sense, a partial ban anyway, because many of the key military powers of the world are not even here in Oslo. And so it would be much better, if you're trying to get the Chinese and the Russians on board in the future, to have the Americans here from the outset. Now, there's going to be some weeks yet before that treaty is signed. The draft treaty will go to Ottawa in December. But if the Americans aren't able to get the wording changed here in Oslo, then they really are going to have to consider their position very carefully.
Are the Americans in the mood to compromise?
Well, the Americans, I think, to be fair, are in a total mess. I think many of the problems reside in Washington rather than here in Oslo. Different branches of the American administration have not really coordinated their positions sufficiently. There's strong military advice from the Pentagon, which seems to be the dominant card in the pack that Mr. Clinton is holding. And I think there's a great deal of frustration here in Oslo. One Scandinavian diplomat said to me that the American position was just simply in chaos, and that the alleged shifts in the American position really represented little more than a repackaging of their original demands.
And Jonathan, even if there is an agreement, what are the prospects for bringing China and Russia on board?
Well, I think that's going to take a considerable amount of time. And remember, the continuing problem with landmines are the many millions that are sown around the world that will remain in the ground for some time. And I think even the Canadians, who are the chief sponsors of this treaty, are insisting that much, much more needs to be done to lift landmines that are sown already if the death toll, the toll of maimed and injured people, is to be reduced.
Thank you. That's all about landmines for the moment. Coming up in the next half hour here on Newsdesk, the business news and another rise in Japan's trade surplus. Then in today's briefing, a critical look at modern art. Is it anything more than just an attempt to shock? And that's followed by the world weather. But first, the rest of the news from Anita McNaught in the newsroom.
Thank you, Phil. This year's annual session of the UN General Assembly has opened with a call for the organization's member states to embrace reform. The incoming president of the Assembly, Hennady Udovenko, also said it was time for countries to unite for the future of the UN.
Another year, another General Assembly, but the theme is very familiar, reform, and how to make the UN fit for the challenges of the 21st century. The incoming president of the Assembly told delegates there were no serious obstacles to reform and urged them to unite to save the UN from becoming a relic of the past.
This issue will be at the center of this session, and I intend to support all efforts aimed at facilitating the process of reform and building a broad consensus that would unite member states in these efforts.
Despite the polite applause of the assembled ambassadors, diplomats are far from united over how to reform the UN. While the countries of the industrialized North emphasize efficiency, developing nations say that's just code for unacceptable cutbacks. There are also serious divisions over how to expand the Security Council and universal anger at the United States continuing debts to the UN.
I hope that the fact that the United States Congress, goaded by the new US administration, which has done a good job in pushing the Congress where it didn't very much want to go, will now come forward and settle those arrears and will also, in the future, be prompt and full in their payments.
For the United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan, who rang the ritual peace bell to start the General Assembly, the next few months will be a serious test of his leadership and his efforts to restore the UN's battered credibility. Rob Watson, BBC News at the United Nations.
The United Nations mediator for the disputed territory of Western Sahara has announced agreement on ways of resolving the conflict through a referendum. The mediator, the former American Secretary of State James Baker, said Morocco and its opponents in the Western Sahara, the Polisario Front, had agreed on a code of conduct for the referendum, which would resolve whether Western Sahara should be independent or be incorporated into Morocco.
It's a dispute that has defied negotiators for decades, but it now seems former US Secretary of State James Baker has finally cracked it. He's brokered an agreement between Moroccan officials and Western Sahara's Polisario Front aimed at settling the conflict in the Northwest African territory. The breakthrough came after 3 days of talks in Houston and earlier discussions in Lisbon and London.
The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and we may or may not see full implementation of this settlement plan for the Western Sahara that was first agreed to back in 1991.
Baker's role in the talks marks his return to the diplomatic world he inhabited during the Bush administration. Acting at the request of UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, he's been trying to establish some ground rules for a referendum to allow voters to choose between independence for Western Sahara or integration with Morocco. Morocco has laid claim to the territory based on historical links which go back over generations. The Western Sahara rebels, known as the Polisario Front, have been fighting for independence ever since Spain abandoned the territory in 1976. A ceasefire 6 years ago, monitored by a UN observer force, ended the guerrilla conflict between the two sides. The United Nations has been trying to organize a referendum for years. The original one was set for 1992, but the protracted wranglings over who should be allowed to vote meant it never got underway. When it does take place, the outcome will determine whether this mineral-rich area should be incorporated into Morocco, which already controls most of the former Spanish colony in northwest Africa. 80,000 voters are expected to take part in the referendum, which is due to be held around July of next year. Helen Sawyer, BBC News.
Talks on the future of Northern Ireland will resume in Belfast today in the wake of Tuesday's bombing in the province. The main Protestant party in Northern Ireland demanded the expulsion of Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, from the talks. The IRA has denied responsibility for the bomb.
The Market Hill bomb presents problems for both Unionists and Sinn Féin. While it may have been blamed on a Republican splinter group, many Unionist people see no distinction with the IRA. And its hand is seen in the bombing by a leader of one of the two small loyalist parties.
We are somewhat sceptical in that when the IRA had no ceasefire, the Continuity Army seemed to be on ceasefire, and when the IRA are not on ceasefire, or they are on ceasefire, the Continuity Army are not. And one has to look, I think, very carefully at that.
The bombing means Sinn Féin yet again must convince the other talks participants of its commitment to non-violent means.
We know that there's a lot of posturing going on. We know that people are hardballing, but they're really playing into the hands of the enemies of the peace process. And those who planted that bomb today are the enemies of the peace process.
And while the Ulster Unionist leader, David Trimble, has raised concerns about Sinn Féin's presence, the major obstacle to his party's joining the talks appears to be agreeing a set of rules for its participation.
I'm afraid those people who laid out timetables earlier this year did so without regard to the seriousness of the issues that were involved, and it can't all be just wrapped up as quickly as some people would like. But we hope that there will be a way of dealing with the issues that have been raised.
The Market Hill bomb may delay Ulster Unionist participation, but the indications are it won't stop it eventually meeting Sinn Féin at the talks. Chris Capper, BBC News, Belfast.
In Paris, the bodyguard who survived the car crash that killed Diana, Princess of Wales, is now fully conscious and able to communicate with doctors. The man, Trevor Rees-Jones, suffered serious facial injuries in the crash, in which he was the front seat passenger. Doctors at the Paris hospital where he's being treated say he's now breathing without a ventilator. Two United States F-16 fighter planes have collided off the coast of New Jersey, the fifth accident involving American military aircraft since Saturday. One of the F-16s was reportedly able to land safely, but the other fell into the sea. Both crewmen were picked up, one was injured. And that's all the news for now. Back to you, Phil.
Thank you. We'll have a glance now at the front pages of some of Europe's newspapers. And as the UN General Assembly reconvenes, Corriere della Sera is cross that Italy is being left out of plans to reform the Security Council. It deplores the inexplicable lack of recognition of Italy's record as a foreign policy broker. Most British papers have pictures of yesterday's bomb in Northern Ireland, which has been attributed to an IRA splinter group. The Guardian's headline, "They will not blow up the talks." The Herald Tribune features Asia's economic woes, what it calls the declawing of the tigers. With Indonesia postponing $14 billion worth of spending, the picture shows scavengers sorting rubbish on a Jakarta building site. Bondevik gets a chance, says Norway's Aftenposten, following the confused outcome of Monday's elections. In the picture, the Christian Democratic leader appears smiling nervously. And howls of outrage in Britain's Daily Mail as a picture of the serial child killer Myra Hindley goes on show at London's Royal Academy. It's made up of hundreds of children's handprints. The paper's comment, sick and disgusting. And we'll be talking more about that controversial exhibition in a few moments. Also to come here on Newsdesk, guilty or not guilty? Investigators hope DNA will solve the crime that's baffled America for 40 years. That's all after the break.
If you're doing business in India, be better informed with India Business Report, only on BBC World. With reports on all the latest financial, industrial and commercial issues, we present the information you need each week.
The Bombay Stock Exchange lost ground steadily through the week.
With the business news from all over India.
Computerization of India is underway.
So for the financial analysis that allows you to make informed business decisions, watch India Business Report at these times on BBC World.
Where better to keep a watchful eye on the daily issues of the world than in the world's daily newspaper? Pick it up today.
Keep easily informed with teletext on BBC World.
There are over 150 million cars in Europe. And the drivers suffer from stress. But not always. Bugatti, Aston Martin and Ferrari, the exception to every rule. Jeremy Clarkson's Top Gear special at these times on BBC World.
You're watching BBC Newsdesk. A quick look now at the latest world headlines. President Clinton defends his decision to hold up a global treaty banning landmines. Talks on the treaty will continue later today. Strong calls for reform at the United Nations as the General Assembly opens its annual session, but some third world countries object. And a breakthrough in negotiations on the future status of Western Sahara. The people are to decide their future in a referendum. In a moment, we'll be looking at modern art. Each new exhibition seems to bring more and more outrageous images, but is it really art or just an attempt to shock? But first, let's take the financial pulse. What's the state of the European economies? Peter Kelly will tell us.
I will, Phil. Thank you. European economies are picking up, indeed, after a disappointing performance in 1995 and 6. But they still urgently need reforms to give the upturn a broader and a lasting base. That's the verdict of the International Monetary Fund, which is meeting this week in Hong Kong. Turning to European Monetary Union, the IMF predicts that some major countries, including France and Germany, could overshoot the targets laid down in the Maastricht Treaty for budget deficits, but that this need not prevent the launch of a single currency. Japan's international trade surplus has risen for a fifth month in a row. It surged nearly 114% in August from a year earlier to 742 billion yen, according to Japan's Ministry of Finance on Wednesday. The controversial trade surplus with the United States jumped 60%. Japanese share prices, though, gained ground in early Wednesday trade, inspired by Wall Street's 175-point rally on Tuesday, but turned back in late trade as Japan's economic worries dominated. The Nikkei closed 2 minutes ago, down 291. In Hong Kong at the lunch break, the Hang Seng is down 219. And on the foreign exchanges, the dollar is a bit weaker against the yen, about a fifth of a yen. Phil.
Thank you. Sensation. That's the title of a new art exhibition which opens in London this week at the Royal Academy. And quite a sensation it's been causing in the British media. The most controversial item is a giant portrait of Britain's most notorious child killer. But as our arts correspondent Nick Hyam has been finding out, such sensational work is hardly designed to soothe the spirit.
In the dignified galleries of the Royal Academy hangs the face of a child murderer. It's an image seen countless times in newspapers, but labelled art and exhibited here, it provokes a storm of outrage. Look closer and you see it's made up of hundreds of children's handprints. One artist member of the Academy has resigned in protest. Others voted only narrowly to allow it on their walls. The portrait of Myra Hindley is only one controversial work in the most controversial exhibition ever mounted by the Academy. The man responsible for including it makes no apology for that or for the rest of the show.
The idea that this painting in any way is extolling Myra Hindley is an absurd thing. In fact, it is confronting an issue which is real, which is what this exhibition is trying to do. And I mean, I think many of these artists, and I think all of the artists in their different ways, are kind of confronting real issues. And this work is just one amongst many.
This is the cream of the British avant-garde. The eggs are fresh each day. They're young British artists who delight to shock and challenge. Many of the images are sexually too explicit to broadcast. One X-rated room is closed to anyone under 18. Other works disturb in more subtle ways, like this tiny mannequin of the artist's dead father. One artist is exhibiting a cast of his own head, transported, packed in dry ice, displayed in a refrigerated cabinet. It's made from almost 10 pints of his own frozen blood. On first meeting it, some have vomited, others fainted, to the artist's surprise.
I think it's an extreme response, and it's also perhaps about self-disgust, because really, I don't find this disgusting. I'm quite come to terms with the fact that I have blood inside me.
The exhibits include the dead shark and cut-up animals preserved in formaldehyde, which made their creator, Damien Hirst, the most notorious young British artist. They all belong to Charles Saatchi, camera-shy millionaire and founder of 2 advertising agencies, seen here reflected in one of Hirst's cut-up cows. But it's not just some members of the Royal Academy who have doubts about these artists' work.
It's a very quick, throwaway kind of work, which you look at, are shocked by, and then you move on. It works in very much the same way that advertising works. It has the same creative philosophy as graphic design, insofar as what you see in sensation are works which illustrate ideas. Often they're not very good ideas. In the case of the Myra Hindley portrait, it's a pretty tasteless, rotten idea. And it seems to me it's no accident that all of this work is owned by perhaps the most eminent advertising executive of the last 20 years, who is someone who by definition knows the value of promotion, hype and marketing.
For the artists themselves, it's a chance to reach a much wider audience than normally see their work.
I'm sure there are people that go in there because they've probably read the newspapers and they'll think they're going there, then it's all going to be about shock and that's about it, and they'll just go there maybe because they want to hate it, or because they'll go because obviously there's a lot of media coverage that they wouldn't normally go to an art exhibition. The thing is, it will cover quite a wide range of different artwork, so yeah, it's in the middle of town. It's bound to get a big audience.
Now the audience can make its own judgment on works like Damien Hirst's Pig, which the organisers claim have made London the world's artistic capital.
Here at the Royal Academy, the young rebels find themselves at the very heart of a citadel of the establishment. Does that mean they've sold out? Looking at the work in this exhibition, provocative, self-confident, sometimes outrageous, it's hard to believe these young artists could ever lose their edge. Nick Hyam, BBC News at the Royal Academy.
So, what are we to make of it all? Enough to turn us all into Philistines? Well, I put that point to Adrian Searle, who's the arts correspondent of The Guardian newspaper, when I spoke to him a short time ago.
The reactions that a lot of the press have had they seem to take a great glee in Great Britain in being shocked, whereas I found the show really exciting, really fresh, and I only got pleasure from it.
Got pleasure from it? What, severed limbs, dismembered torsos, bullet holes through the brain, frozen blood? I mean, it was more like a pathology museum than an art gallery.
One can get pleasure in pathology museums as well, and in fact the bullet hole in the brain is in fact a close-up view of the backside of a chicken.
So what's the pleasure you get out of it?
I think art has to deal with issues in the real world. Perhaps the word pleasure isn't the right word. And a lot of the artists here are dealing with matters of life, death, society, memory. One of the more shocking exhibits, supposedly, is a work by Jake and Dinos Chapman, which has severed limbs and upside-down figures, and it's actually a three-dimensional reworking of a 19th century etching by Goya, which was made in horror at the Napoleonic Wars. And this seems to me to be what art has always dealt with. It's always dealt with big issues.
Yes, but it's the way it's dealing with the big issues. I mean, is it art? I mean, what is the intrinsic artistic merit of some of those things we've just seen?
Questions as to whether or not things are art are very difficult to defend and pretty difficult to attack in a way, because the means and materials that artists use in the 20th century are bound to be different from what they would have used 50 years ago. We have TV, we have cinema, as someone said earlier this morning, that we've had advertising. Artists are bound to use all these techniques in the promotion of their ideas now.
But is this going to be great art? I mean, are the works we've just seen going to be put up there with the great masters, Rembrandt, the Titians and all the rest of them?
Time will sort that out. We're not really in the position to do that.
But do you think so? Do you think there's any chance?
I think there's a very significant chance that we will look back in 10, 20, 30 years' time and see these works as very much of their period, in the same way as we look back at David Hockney's work in the 1960s. What will happen later on is really something that we can't second guess.
So what is their significance then?
I think because they're the first generation of British artists since the Second World War who've really broken out of the mould of Britishness and who are taking on the world in ways which the world seems to demand. All the shocks, if they are indeed shocks, are manufactured, and I believe that the media is inventing the shock rather than the shocks being actually intrinsic to the work itself.
Adrian Searle defending a sensational exhibition in London. In a few hours' time, the latest twist will take place in a celebrated 43-year-old murder case when the body of Dr. Sam Shepard is exhumed at a cemetery in the American state of Ohio. It's hoped his remains will yield DNA evidence which could finally help solve the crime. Shepard, who died in 1970, was found guilty of murdering his wife in 1954. Many believe he was wrongly charged. Tom Brooke reports on how investigators will be considering the remaining evidence.
Solving the 1954 murder of Marilyn Shepard in this Cleveland suburb has become a national American obsession. Her husband, Dr. Sam Shepard, was charged with the crime and sentenced to life in prison. But he always maintained his innocence, claiming the probable killer was a bushy-haired intruder who knocked him out on the night of the murder. In 1963, his lawyer won an appeal, arguing that Shepard had been denied a fair trial because of sensationalized press coverage. The case went to the Supreme Court, and Shepard was retried and acquitted. But when Sam Shepard died, many still believed he was guilty. His son hopes exhuming his remains will finally clear his name.
We need to get a definite readout of the DNA of my dad. We have tried everything that we could in terms of the saliva from envelopes that my dad licked and that sort of thing. We just didn't have any relics of my dad's around, his pipes or a jacket or something where we could have gotten a definite readout with the DNA.
Lawyer and investigative reporter Cynthia Cooper maintains another man, convicted murderer Richard Eberling, a window cleaner who'd worked in the Shepard home, is the prime suspect. She says his DNA matches blood left by the killer at the scene of the crime.
It's conclusive enough that somebody looking at it should go, wow, well, let's go check this out. It's a 99.96% match.
The Shepard murder case inspired the popular fugitive TV series in the 1960s, and more recently, a Hollywood blockbuster. The media interest in the case has long been intense and dates back to the 1954 Shepard trial.
Well, it's a little bit like O.J. Simpson. Even though O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of murder, there's still a lot of people who believe he's guilty and would like to see further investigation, perhaps. This was called the trial of the century back then, back before O.J. Simpson. This was the trial that everyone talked about. It was one of the first trials where TV cameras were allowed in. And at the time, the judge didn't have control of the courtroom, and it was a media circus inside.
It's expected that DNA testing following today's exhumation will yield a result within the next 2 months. Shepherd's son hopes it will finally clear the family name and help him win a civil lawsuit for what he claims were the years of his father's wrongful imprisonment. Tom Brooke, BBC News, New York.
You've been watching BBC Newsdesk as delegates at the World Landmines Conference prepare a draft treaty on a global ban. The United States is holding up any agreement because of its concerns over security in Korea. American proposals include a 9-year delay in implementing the treaty and an opt-out for any country which comes under attack. But it's unclear so far whether they'll get enough support. In a moment we'll have the weather, but that's all for now from Newsdesk. Goodbye.
Hello again, welcome to our forecast. Many parts of Europe have been dry over the last 24 hours, but there are one or two places that have actually caught quite a lot of rain, particularly the borders of Scotland. Through yesterday, Tuesday, quite a heavy band of rain moved southwards. You can see where it was yesterday evening, the bright colours on the radar picture illustrating where the heaviest rainfall was. And as it moved south, it left 45 millimetres of rain in just 24 hours in Eskdalemuir. Well, that rain has also crossed the North Sea in towards Scandinavia, and you can see the extent of that rather dark and ominous band of cloud. There's more rain to come here. Quite blustery winds as well. We've got quite a deep area of low pressure, and those tightly packed isobars illustrating the strength of the wind. Some quite stormy conditions in the Baltic and up in towards the Gulf of Bothnia. Further south, there is high pressure, means dry and settled weather, some sunshine here as well. Apart from this region of the Mediterranean, there's probably going to be more thunderstorms and more heavy showers likely here. On the other side of the Atlantic, it's also been wet in Minneapolis, 50 millimetres of rain falling in just 12 hours. And that very bright band of rain on this radar picture is moving quite swiftly away to the east. So eventually it's going to dry up, it'll brighten up, and we'll see some sunshine. So this is the city forecast through Thursday and Friday across North America. Some sunshine, I think, in Denver as well as Chicago, but one or two showers turning up on Friday with a top temperature in Chicago of around 25 Celsius. Now, on the other side of the Pacific, it's been very stormy indeed across Japan. Very wet as well. 307 millimetres of rain in just a 24-hour period. There's been flood problems. Of course, we've had Typhoon Oliver move through the region. It looks like another one's following in behind. That's its latest position. Let me show you its movement from yesterday. It's moving quite quickly in a north or northwest direction at the moment. It'll then turn to the north, and it's going to come fairly close to the eastern seaboard of Honshu through Thursday and Friday, with strong winds again and more heavy rain, unfortunately. And that's the forecast. Bye for now.
You know, I'm 74 years old. They still think I'll throw the first punch.
The deaths my father lived with must have been the deaths of the people that he loved.
People sometimes ask me whether I'm having a midlife crisis, but it seems to me that every day is a crisis.
A new guest every day in the Hardtalk interview. Next on BBC World.
The Club of International Business is quite unique. There's no special handshake. No one clubhouse, and the uniforms, well, no particular requirements. However, the members do carry one special card. Diners Club, the right answer in any language.
This is assignment in Iraq.
They threatened my family, my children.
Driven by fear and equipped for revenge, this is assignment in Afghanistan. Crippled by communism, finding refuge in crime, this is assignment in Brazil. Bound by poverty and paying in land, this is assignment, committed to investigative reportage around the world at these times.
You're watching BBC World. Now, Hardtalk.
He's been described as one of the glories of modern American literature and a talent with rare imagination. He needs it. Writing about children and divorce with no direct experience of either. He's won a Pulitzer Prize but confesses to a gnawing fear of failure. And when Hollywood came calling, he told them they'd only screw up his books and should leave them in peace. We'll ask him why. Richard Ford, a very warm welcome to Hard Talk. You've said that as a writer, you provide a service.
Yeah.
What kind of service is that?
Well, I don't mean like carrying your bags. I don't mean that kind of a service. I just think that a service insofar as you address a readership. You're not writing. I'm not anyway writing just for me. If I didn't think I had somebody who would read my books, I wouldn't write them. And so what then do I address to them? I address my attention, playing over the most important things I know, put forward in the most select, most felicitous language that I can, making shapes in which are stories and giving it to the readership, and then thinking to myself, well, it's about important things. It has a kind of a position.
So it should be useful, as Walter Benjamin said. Stories had to have a use, didn't they?
Absolutely. And so it's a service in that sense. And I mean, I think probably some writers feel when they hear a line like that somewhat demeaned, but I don't mean it in a demeaning way. All I mean is that I don't think I write stories in a vacuum.
But it's a service in trying to improve people's lives, trying to give them an extra insight into their own lives, trying to strike a chord with them?
Maybe give them an extra insight. You know, when the book gets into the reader's hands, you don't know what's going to happen to it. So in essence, you don't really know. You just make the book the best you know how to make it, about the most important things you know, and give it to them and hope that they find a use for it.
You say about the things that you know, but you don't like your books always being associated with you or parts of your biography.
No.
You prefer to talk about the power of imagination.
That's
don't
right.
you?
That's right. I mean,
that's your strength, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I hope I have a strength. I don't know. I don't think that writing about myself is interesting to me. And I think that writing for myself is not interesting to me. So I think, you know, for me to postulate about or guess about through the agency of sympathy, things I don't know, is in fact what people in their lives do all the time. So I'm trying to make up something that isn't. I already know what is. I'm trying to make up something that's different from, but related to what we already know.
So it's observation and imagination. It's got to be, hasn't it?
Sure,
it's got to be
a combination. I collect things. I'm always writing things down and putting them together in new configurations.
And you're always traveling. You're never staying still in one place.
Well, you
kind of suck a place dry, don't you?
Well,
and then you move on.
Except, I do move around a lot, but maybe I have a limited imagination of my own. Maybe if I get someplace and stay there very long, I start to get tired of it. I don't know. But I know when I go to Paris or when I go to Berlin, as we were talking about, I don't go there to write about it. Maybe 5 years from now, I'll write something that takes place in Berlin. But I'd go there sometimes just to have something new out my window where I can concentrate on what I'm doing, bringing with me the work that I've already commenced.
And to see how people relate to the places they live in. That's a powerful theme in your books, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but I think that's something I make up. I don't know if people relate to the places that they live in under ordinary circumstances very differently, at least by my observation. Maybe somebody smarter than I am would notice that they do. For the most part, place in stories for me is just a kind of a background for what's going on among the human beings that I put in the foreground, the characters.
Well, one of your main characters, Frank Bascom, says in Independence Day, doesn't he, place is nothing.
Yeah, well, he said that.
He said that, so you said it.
I wrote it. He said it. He gets credit for it. But in that
But
book,
that's not you.
No, it's not me. Though he and I suppose, share certain kinds of assumptions about place, which is that for the ways in which we value place, we do most of the valuing. We do most of the imputing of what's important. And that places, by and large, mountain ranges and little towns and all those places that we have sentimental relationships with, are at the beginning inert. Maybe we have histories there, but for them to go on being important, we have to do the asserting of their importance. Because the places themselves, and this is when Frank says this in Independence Day, the places themselves often don't show any record of us, often don't give us back that feeling that we would like to ask for them if we're sentimental enough or romantic enough to ask them to give us back something.
Is there a sense of urgency in your writing? You're in your 50s now. You said, I think, you're aware of there being less time in your life, and if you have high intentions or serious intentions, the time is now.
Yeah, there has been that in the last, probably in the last 10 years. I hope it goes on. You can't exactly know what you're going to do or how that sense of urgency is going to last out in your life. But I know from about 1983 to now, which is 14 or so years, I have felt like I was operating with a sense of profound urgency.
In a sense, you always have, haven't you? Because when you were teaching law for that semester in 1967, you thought, this isn't going anywhere, this is dreary.
That's right.
And you decided to take a walk in the dark.
Yeah, I did. I just sort of looked at it. Well, I don't know, because I guess maybe because I was brought up in the 60s. And I came at least to relative adulthood in the 60s. And there was, in America, there was a sense in the 60s that your life ought to be for something, that you ought to be able to do something with your life, make it contribute to the common weal, to some larger good. And I really did feel that. And I guess in some ways I still feel it. And I could tell when I was in law school that this wasn't going to be a good contribution for me to make.
But it took time, didn't it, for you to make a success out of writing? I mean, there was a long time.
Maybe it hasn't happened yet.
Well, the critics wouldn't say that. But it took almost 20 years, didn't
Yeah.
it, for some kind of recognition? Was that a disheartening period in some way for you?
Well, I mean, I had my moments when I quit, actually, in 1981, about the time my mother was dying, and all kinds of things in life seemed to be under a lot of heat. I just thought, well, I hadn't found much of a readership by then, and I had written 2 books. Neither of them was in print, and so I thought, well, maybe you better go out and earn an honest living here someplace. So I did go out and earn an honest living until all of those to that job quit, and I got sort of pushed back into writing novels after the jobs I tried to get subsided and went away. But I never...
It was a means of living, wasn't it? It was, in a sense, it was just a commercial exercise to start with, wasn't it? Or did you think to write?
Books?
Or did you think of it as this high calling?
I always thought of it as a high calling.
Did you?
I never thought I'd earn a nickel at it, actually. And you know, again, I guess it's part of being a kid from the 60s. I never thought about earning a nickel, period. And my wife, bless her heart, always says to me, and says to me still, don't worry about that thing. Don't worry about making a buck. Try to write the best book you can write. And that's really what I did. And I don't mean to say that I was ignorant of money or that I didn't scrap around on the peripheries of my writing life and try to make money, because I did. But that was never what was pushing me on. I mean, in America, to think that you're going to make a lot of money as a writer sort of commits you to writing certain kinds of books, I think.
But success in writing is measured by the amount of money your publisher gives you, doesn't it?
Well, my notion of success, and everybody has to define success for herself or himself, my notion of success was being able to finish a book and finding a readership for it. Within that,
as large a readership as possible.
Yeah, the more the better.
Which means money.
Well, if that's what it means to you, then that's what it means to you. If it means something else to me, then it means something else to me. I mean, again, you have to define those things for yourself. I mean, you could say that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in America makes a whopping salary. But you would also say he's probably not in it for the money. So I think that it must be possible not to be in it for the money.
Where does this gnawing fear of failure come from that we talked about?
From some experience with it, probably. I just had this notion when I was in my 20s that the 3 or 4 things that I had tried to do hadn't worked out. And I got this idea when I was about 23 that I was getting old at a high rate of speed. More fool now.
30 years on.
Yeah, 30 years on when I am getting old. But I just thought, you don't want to have something else come up, a cropper on you here. So I guess...
So this has got to work.
Well, this, yeah, this, if I'm going to do this and it's going to take me 8 years to get anything published, which is what it did do, it better be good when you get to the end of that 8 years. And so it was a wonderful urgency. That fear of failure for me was a nice, was a nice fire under me, I think. I don't think it was bad.
If you spend, as you've done, so many years on one book, 4 years, was it, on Independence Day. What is it like? What is the sense of achievement at the end as you write the last sentence and you push it away?
Well, at that moment, the sense of achievement is that, by God, I did this. And I got all of these things that I thought were terrifically important into some heretofore unthought of form. And here it is. When something is finished, it goes through, I guess, inevitably, different phases in your estimation of it. Finally, when you have done all you can to it, then you pass it on to the readers and inevitably to reviewers and people who say things about it, and then it becomes something else. But
you mind what they say about it,
I don't read what they say about it anymore, because it used to make me so mad, and it used to make me hurt my feelings. And even the good reviews were always, you know, made up of language chosen by the reviewer, and I could always find in a good review something to annoy me. So,
but you put your head on the block. Don't you have to expect that people are going to try and chop it off?
Yes, yes. So
you just don't want to subject yourself
so all
to
I'm
it.
doing is saying I'm closing my eyes. That's what I'm doing. After my head is on the block, I'm not going to look up at the blade. I mean, yeah, but on the other hand, though, Tim, that's their job. That's what book reviewers do. It isn't as though it's some mendacious assignment that they have. It's fair enough that they should do that. It just doesn't behoove me necessarily, if it has a bad effect on my day-to-day life, to be constantly staring at what they're doing all the time, as though somehow their judgment, each and every one of them, was the final judgment on my book.
People say you've got a temper. Hard to imagine when you're sitting here, very friendly, very amiable.
Doesn't everybody have a temper?
I don't know. They don't all beat up a neighbor. You beat up a neighbor, they say.
Oh, well.
What happened? What was that about?
Just a misunderstanding. And in New Orleans, it's a very volatile situation, and nothing really. Nobody. Well, I put it to you this way: we had a little fracas, and we're friends now. He said to me, this nice man actually, though anyway, he said, you know, if we hadn't had that little fracas, he said, I would have probably never known that I had high blood pressure, and probably wouldn't be alive today. He said, because when we had this little fracas, he got sort of agitated, and somebody came and took his blood pressure, and he said, I would have probably had a stroke if we hadn't had this argument. So,
but you said at one point, I've hit a lot of people in the face, perhaps too many in my life.
Well, yeah, but look at me, dressed like an American fraternity boy. I mean, I'm not your idea of a palooka, I don't think.
Your mother kept you out of trouble, though, didn't she, when
Yes,
you were growing up as a teenager?
She did her best.
Kept you away from scrapes with the law.
After my father died, she said to me, and I was 16 and was in various kinds of little troubles. And I grew up in the suburbs, so the kinds of troubles that I had were the kinds of troubles that suburban kids had, and you know, adjustment troubles. And maybe they would have led me astray, maybe they wouldn't. But she said to me after my father died, she said, I'm not going to come get you out of jail anymore. Or I'm not going to come get you.
If you call up, nobody's home.
Yeah. She said, I'm not going to, I love you, but I cannot look after you as though you had two parents anymore. So you look after yourself and take care of yourself.
Was that a big effect on you?
Oh, it had a huge effect on me, because I knew she meant it. I absolutely knew that this was reality talking to me. It's often the case, you know, that people say things to you and you hear them, but it doesn't get in your brain somehow. I got in my brain big time.
Mark Twain, Henry James, also got in your brain during that period. You read them?
I did. Yeah, I did read Mark Twain. I was actually really never a big fan of Mark Twain. I don't know why. I know it's an American heresy to say that you weren't much affected by Mark Twain, but, you know, my whole take on literature was to try to use it for myself in some ways to be better than I was. And that meant, because I cared so much about language, to try to find ways to use the language that were better than the ways I was using the language. And
did you want to compete with the other authors?
Oh, no.
No sense of that?
No, that's really, as much as America is founded on competition, and it seems to be a going concern in America, I don't notice that American writers compete very much. I mean, we all, when we see somebody having great success, probably say in our little tiny hearts, I wish I could have success like that. But I don't know very many people, and I'm certainly not one of them either, who say, God, I wish that hadn't happened to her or him. I wish it had happened to me.
And yet you're a spiky, combative bunch. I mean, we were talking about Norman Mailer earlier.
Yeah, but I don't think...
Goes into places and throws punches at people, or used to it anyway.
Used to it. He'd probably be advised to quit doing that. Probably all of us would be advised. Yeah, but I mean, to want for yourself something good and to try really hard in that spiky, combative way to do something good is different from wanting to take it away from somebody else. And I don't feel that way, and I bet Norman doesn't either.
Your grandfather, when you were growing up, died in fairly tragic circumstances, didn't he? He gambled his farm in a card game and came back and shot himself on the porch. Did that leave a lasting effect on you?
Well, it left an effect on me because this was before I was born, but it left an
fairly
effect.
extraordinary thing to do, wasn't it?
I guess so. It was out. That was over in western Arkansas, pretty close to what had been not long before then a frontier, the Oklahoma frontier. It left an effect on me because nobody ever would talk about it. And it sort of made me realize that there were all kinds of things under the skein of ordinary life that were worth knowing about, that things as they seemed and as they were reported to you weren't always complete, which is a useful thing to know if you're going to be a novelist. Of course, as regards my grandfather, whom I never knew, and whom my father never knew, because this was taking place while before my father was born, just before he was born, it made a lot of that stuff seem to need to be made up.
Hence the imagination.
Hence
the growth of the imagination.
That I can make, since I don't know everything, I'm going to have to penetrate those things that I don't know with my rather combative, aggressive imagination, and an affection for language.
You grew up knowing that Mississippi was pretty poor, pretty blighted. You grew up wanting more.
I did.
What? What did you want?
I wanted not to be a race hater, for one thing. And I think that the social pressures in Mississippi would have worked on me probably in bad ways. I don't think it would have made me be a race hater, because I wasn't by nature. And God knows, most of my friends whom I grew up with have grown up to be not race haters either. But I wanted that. I wanted somehow to get out from under that shadow of racism and an apartheid society. And I just
Which is still there in a way, isn't it?
Well, it'll always be there. It'll always be there. The history, the future of race relations in America is always going to be somewhat, maybe not as much as now, somewhat blinded by the history of slavery. The shadow that slavery cast over American life stretches into a future, the end of which I cannot even imagine.
It's a sad indictment, isn't it?
But it doesn't mean you can't keep on keeping on. It doesn't mean that you can't keep on trying in whatever small way you have at your discretion to do better, to be better.
Richard Ford, apart from your work, your wife is the most important person in your life. This is a very important relationship to you, and yet you don't live together, do you?
Well, in the last couple of years, Christina has been the planning director for the city of New Orleans, and it's a very, very addictive and preoccupying and in many ways powerful job. She just has needed whatever she needed to do the job. It came along, that job, at a time when work got good for me and people were asking me to go here and go there, and so we just kind of agreed that for the time of her job and for the time of this period, we would go do what we're doing, and that's what we're doing. But it doesn't bespeak, my God, any lack of affection.
Isn't that hard? Live apart?
We don't have any kids, and we both understand that what we do in life means to make a contribution. It's hard sometimes. I don't think it's a deal breaker, though. Frankly.
Why no kids? Because this was a conscious decision on your part, wasn't it? Or both your parts, really.
Yeah.
Why?
Probably different for each of us. I grew up in a happy childhood, and I thought to myself, I should quit while I was ahead, I think. She grew up in a family that had endured a divorce, and she maybe felt differently about the possibility of having kids. I actually think that we wanted to do what we wanted to do when we were 22 and 23 years old, and that a child didn't fit into it at all at that point. And at each point when we looked at it again, there still wasn't a fit. And also, you know, we had a lot of people who were our contemporaries who had kids and immediately seemed sorry or didn't seem to be particularly good parents.
But you suggested in some of the things you said that you were afraid of being a failure as a father. You didn't want to fail at that.
Well,
it was unknown territory for you.
When one is a failure as a parent, it's not oneself who ends up suffering. It's that little creature who you've brought into the world. So yeah, I didn't want to.
You don't think everybody feels that way?
Maybe they do. Maybe they do. But I know it's been a lot easier to write about kids, and maybe I've had even better luck writing about kids than I would have had raising kids myself, because I wanted to be a writer, and that's all I wanted to do.
How could you write about them if you had no direct experience, if you didn't put them to bed at night or get them up in the morning or hear those little conversations in the middle of the night? How could you get to the essence of children?
It must not be very hard. That's all I can figure. Also, you know, to be a writer of the sort of writer that I am, sort of a realistic kind of writer, you're paying attention to things around you all the time and noting it and paying attention to it again and noting it again and paying attention to it. And then you're again writing it in a speculative way. It's the reader who has to decide if you get it right. I mean, and a reader could just as likely decide that I didn't get it right. So fundamentally what I think, Tim, is that it's out there to be noticed. how kids comport themselves.
But
how,
not to be experienced, at least in your case. Out there to be...
I mean, as a parent?
Observed, yeah.
No. You know...
Could have been an inspiration for you.
Well,
do you think?
I do think sometimes in writers' lives, mine included, that the things that you don't do comprise a big hollow in your life, which you can fill one way. You can fill it with regret, or you can fill it with words. You can fill it with speculation, with the imagination. And I think that's what I've done. I've written a lot of stories about boys and fathers, and I think there's no doubt in my mind, and I don't think this is the end-all, be-all theory of fiction, but I know to the extent that those stories are urgent and have some drama, it's because they are slightly compensatory in my life.
Do you think that if you'd had children, you wouldn't be as lonely as you've said you've been over some of the years?
Well, I'm sure I wouldn't be. I'm sure I'd be stark raving nuts is what I would be if I'd had kids, because I would have gone on wanting to be a writer, and then I would be having to do all those things that parents have to do. I think lonely maybe is not what I've been. I think I've a lot of times found myself isolated, and that's different from lonely in my view. I mean, isolation is sort of a physical condition. Loneliness is a sort of emotional or spiritual condition. I don't think I've ever been lonely like that, because I've had my work to do. I've lived with the same person for 34 years.
The work almost cost you your marriage, didn't it?
Well,
I mean, particularly Independence Day.
Probably everybody who has a big project like that pushes out the seams of his most intimate relationships. Yeah, there was just a time at the end. This is about 3 years ago, when I was finishing Independence Day, and Christina and I always had a protocol for how I would finish books, which was that she would let me, unbelievably, read the book to her. And sometimes it would take a month. Well, she didn't have a month.
All day, every day, or just at night?
Well, a lot of hours over a lot of days, yeah. Looking back on it now, it seems preposterous given her life. But she couldn't do it then because her work was taking up too much of her
But you love her so much, she's so important to you. Would you risk that relationship again for your work? Is the work so important that you could put her in that position?
Well, you never enter the same river twice, right? It's at the same place. I don't know. I mean, I didn't know I was doing it then. All I know was but there's a good side and a bad side to it. When she couldn't do it, when she couldn't let me read it to her, then I had to do it myself. And in a way, it rendered me more, I think, self-sufficing. And insofar as it rendered me more self-sufficing, I think it was a good thing. It was a good thing. I think I wouldn't go back to that situation. I couldn't go back to that place in the river, in essence.
Are you a compulsive writer when you're writing?
No, I'm not a compulsive anything, really, actually. No,
writing is the home that you return to, in a sense. You have said that in the past.
It often seems that way. It often seems that way. No, I do it because I want to. And I do it because I have a high estimation of the efficacy of literature. I mean, I have high ambition.
The efficacy to influence life, or to illuminate life, or please people.
Yeah, to please, to illuminate, to do all of those classical kinds of chores that we look to literature to do. I think that's what I would like to do as a writer.
It's given you new meaning to your life?
Given me a meaning. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to do in essence whether I succeed or whether I don't. I'm trying to do what great literature did for me, which is to change my life, renew my sense of life's importance, to enhance my sense of what language is about. Yeah, so sure it has done that. Yeah, I'm lucky in that way.
Richard Ford, thank you very much for being with us on Hardtalk. It's been a pleasure
My
to meet
great pleasure.
you.
News can break anywhere in the world at any time.
John Simpson, BBC News,
Botswana.
But the BBC has 250 correspondents
based right across the globe.
BBC Delhi.
So wherever the news is happening, we'll be in the right place.
at the right time.
And we know about the region we're reporting from.
I'll pass you the sat phone.
We can find ourselves filing reports from far-flung, remote places.
Or from the heart of international summit conferences.
Whenever the news is happening, we are out in the field covering it.
We cover all the continents.
In a way no other news organisation can match.
With unrivaled expertise and experience.
Both out in the field
and back in the newsroom.
Ensuring that wherever we report from,
whatever the story,
we'll always keep you better informed.
The BBC, the largest news gathering operation in the world.
With news and information 24 hours a day, this is BBC World.
Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Anita McNaught. The headlines: the UN General Assembly opens its annual session with the main focus on internal reforms and the debts owed to it by the US. President Clinton says the United States is committed to the elimination of anti-personnel landmines, but not in Korea. And news of a breakthrough in negotiations on the future status of the Western Sahara. This year's annual session of the UN General Assembly has opened with a call for the organization's member states to embrace reform. The incoming president of the Assembly, Hennady Udovenko, also said it was time for countries to unite for the future of the UN.
Another year, another General Assembly, but the theme is very familiar: reform, and how to make the UN fit for the challenges of the 21st century. The incoming president of the Assembly told delegates there were no serious obstacles to reform and urged them to unite to save the UN from becoming a relic of the past.
This issue will be at the center of this session, and I intend to support all efforts aimed at facilitating the process of reform and building a broad consensus that would unite member states in these efforts.
Despite the polite applause of the assembled ambassadors, diplomats are far from united over how to reform the UN. While the countries of the industrialized North emphasize efficiency, developing nations say that's just code for unacceptable cutbacks. There are also serious divisions over how to expand the Security Council and universal anger at the United States continuing debts to the UN.
I hope that the fact that the United States Congress, goaded by the new US administration, which has done a good job in pushing the Congress where it didn't very much want to go, will now come forward and settle those arrears, and will also, in the future, be prompt and full in their payments.
For the United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan, who rang the ritual peace bell to start the General Assembly, the next few months will be a serious test of his leadership and his efforts to restore the UN's battered credibility. Rob Watson, BBC News at the United Nations.
President Clinton has reaffirmed the United States' commitment to the elimination of anti-personnel landmines, but he said the situation in Korea posed a special problem with regard to achieving a worldwide ban. The US has already called an unexpected adjournment of an international conference in Oslo because it wants to delay the implementation of a draft treaty banning landmines. The International Committee of the Red Cross has described the American attempt as an appalling prospect.
President Clinton's intervention followed a day and a night of telephone diplomacy with Canada and with Oslo to broker a last-ditch compromise. Instead of the immediate and total ban being demanded, the United States wants a 9-year delay because it believes landmines are vital to the defense of South Korea.
With the single exception of Korea, everyone in the world recognizes that Korea is a special problem because of the number of North Korean troops that are very close to Seoul. And we have been working with the people in Oslo to try to get an extended period of time to deal with that.
Washington also wants to be allowed to use anti-personnel and anti-tank mines together as defensive weapons.
We have another day or so to try to work through this. The United States would like to be a signatory to this agreement, but I have to be sure that we can fulfill our responsibilities and protect our troops.
The delay has caused some dismay in Oslo, where delegates of the 100 or so countries at the conference fear a watering down of the comprehensive treaty they're seeking. At the same time, there's little chance of getting countries like Russia and China to sign up without the Americans on board. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, a priceless crusader for the cause, with her visits to Bosnia and Angola, has increased the public pressure for a ban and left Washington isolated. But millions of mines remain active long after the end of the conflicts for which they were laid. It will require more hard work in the field and at the negotiating table before the world can call time on these deadly tools of war. Jim Fish, BBC News.
2 United States F-16 fighter planes have collided off the coast of New Jersey, the 5th accident involving American military aircraft since Saturday. One of the F-16s was reportedly able to land safely, but the other fell into the sea. Both crewmen were picked up, one was injured. Divers are continuing the search for bodies trapped in the hull of an overloaded ferry that sank off the coast of Haiti 9 days ago. So far, about 170 bodies have been recovered. The death toll remains unclear because the authorities don't know how many people boarded the ferry. The ship is perched on a mound about 36 meters below the surface, but is in danger of slipping into water as deep as 400 meters. The United Nations mediator for the disputed territory of Western Sahara has announced agreement on ways of resolving the conflict through a referendum. The mediator, the former American Secretary of State James Baker, said Morocco and its opponents in the Western Sahara, the Polisario Front, had agreed on a code of conduct for the referendum, which would resolve whether Western Sahara should be independent or incorporated into Morocco.
It's a dispute that has defied negotiators for decades, but it now seems former US Secretary of State James Baker has finally cracked it. He's brokered an agreement between Moroccan officials and Western Sahara's Polisario Front aimed at settling the conflict in the Northwest African territory. The breakthrough came after 3 days of talks in Houston and earlier discussions in Lisbon and London.
The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and we may or may not see full implementation of this settlement plan for the Western Sahara that was first agreed to back in 1991.
Baker's role in the talks marks his return to the diplomatic world he inhabited during the Bush administration. Acting at the request of UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, he's been trying to establish some ground rules for a referendum to allow voters to choose between independence for Western Sahara or integration with Morocco. Morocco has laid claim to the territory based on historical links which go back over generations. The Western Sahara rebels, known as the Polisario Front, have been fighting for independence ever since Spain abandoned the territory in 1976. A ceasefire 6 years ago, monitored by a UN observer force, ended the guerrilla conflict between the two sides. The United Nations has been trying to organize a referendum for years. The original one was set for 1992, but the protracted wranglings over who should be allowed to vote meant it never got underway. When it does take place, the outcome will determine whether this mineral-rich area should be incorporated into Morocco, which already controls most of the former Spanish colony in northwest Africa. 80,000 voters are expected to take part in the referendum, which is due to be held around July of next year. Helen Sawyer, BBC News.
Talks on the future of Northern Ireland will resume in Belfast today in the wake of Tuesday's bombing in the province. The main Protestant party in Northern Ireland demanded the expulsion of Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, from the talks. The IRA has denied responsibility for the bomb.
The Market Hill bomb presents problems for both Unionists and Sinn Féin. While it may have been blamed on a Republican splinter group, many unionist people see no distinction with the IRA. And its hand is seen in the bombing by a leader of one of the two small loyalist parties.
We are somewhat sceptical in that when the IRA had no ceasefire, the Continuity Army seemed to be on ceasefire, and when the IRA are not on ceasefire, or they are on ceasefire, the Continuity Army are not. And one has to look, I think, very carefully at that.
The bombing means Sinn Féin yet again must convince the other talks participants of its commitment to non-violent means.
We know that there's a lot of posturing going on. We know that people are hardballing, but they're really playing into the hands of the enemies of the peace process. And those who planted that bomb today are the enemies of the peace process.
And while the Ulster Unionist leader, David Trimble, has raised concerns about Sinn Féin's presence, the major obstacle to his party's joining the talks appears to be agreeing a set of rules for its participation.
I'm afraid those people who laid out timetables earlier this year did so without regard to the seriousness of the issues that were involved. And it can't all be just wrapped up as quickly as some people would like. But we hope that there will be a way of dealing with the issues that have been raised.
The Market Hill bomb may delay Ulster Unionist participation, but the indications are it won't stop it eventually meeting Sinn Féin at the talks. Chris Capper, BBC News, Belfast.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has cancelled a planned visit to Romania in order to deal with the crisis caused by the occupation of two houses in East Jerusalem by Jewish settlers. In a move to defuse the tension, the Israeli police say they'll prevent any more settlers from moving into the neighbourhood.
The settlers have been here for 2 days and show no signs of leaving. They say they should be allowed to live anywhere they want in Jerusalem. The two buildings they're living in are owned by a Miami-based Jewish millionaire who plans to build more homes for Jews on the edge of this Arab neighbourhood. The situation has embarrassed the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, even though Palestinians accuse Israel of involvement in the takeover. If he forces the settlers out, he'll lose the backing of right-wing groups that make up the bulk of his support. He also risks alienating US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who only last week had urged him not to take actions that would anger the Palestinians. Mr. Netanyahu is waiting for a ruling by the Attorney General, Eliakim Rubinstein, on whether he can expel the settlers by invoking national security. Palestinian leaders are now stepping up their pressure, warning of certain violence if the settlers don't leave. Philip Lote, BBC News.
Still to come, 4 litres of frozen blood cast in the shape of the artist's head. Just one of the shockers at London's latest art sensation. The government of Papua New Guinea has warned that parts of the country could face severe food shortages as a result of a prolonged drought which has affected highland regions. The drought's been attributed to the onset of the El Niño weather phenomenon, which has been disrupting weather patterns on both sides of the Pacific.
The magnificent highlands of Papua New Guinea are normally a lush green at this time of year. 8 months of drought has left vast tracts of jungle ravaged by bushfires. Cash crops have withered and died, and now the government's warned that if rain doesn't come soon, a serious famine could be in the offing, leaving up to 1 million people facing starvation. The worst drought in 50 years has been blamed on the El Niño, a sudden reversal of currents and a weakening of trade winds across the Pacific. Scientists warn that the current El Niño could be the biggest on record. Highland villagers are reported to be migrating away from the worst affected areas. So far, 80 deaths have been attributed to the drought. Families are selling their most valuable possessions, notably prized pigs, to buy food. There are already reports of starvation. Coffee, a big export crop, has been badly hit, and as river levels drop, big copper and gold mines have been brought to a standstill. The government's announced an emergency aid package, and Australia's also provided assistance. As other relief agencies and the World Bank work to assess the extent of the crisis, the Prime Minister, Bill Skate, called on the nation to unite in the face of a hard year ahead. Let's pray for rain to come soon, he was quoted as saying. Jonathan Miller, BBC News.
India has for the first time agreed to allow foreigners to inspect its nuclear power stations. A team from the World Association of Nuclear Operators will go to the Karakpur nuclear power station in the northwestern state of Gujarat early next year. The decision is being seen as a significant policy change.
A celebration earlier this month of India's long history of expertise in nuclear energy, and an opportunity for Prime Minister I.K. Gujral to reaffirm India's long-standing position that it's only in the business of harnessing nuclear energy for peaceful purposes.
Despite all sometimes the criticisms that we are confronted with from outside, India has proved time and again that even when it has capacity to make nuclear weapons, it has not done so. I think now the test that we did once is now far behind us. And this policy continues to be Government of India's policy.
India's civil nuclear program is ambitious, but it's suffered a number of major safety incidents recently. Few observers doubt India's scientific standards, but there are worries about its ability to handle the practical problems of running nuclear plants day in, day out. And these have been fueled by India's traditional reticence to allow foreign inspections, in part because of worries about military snooping. Now, for the first time, India is allowing in a team of foreign experts. They're from an international association of nuclear power station owners and operators. It's non-governmental. Its reports remain confidential unless the country concerned wishes otherwise. It won't allay military fears that India does indeed have the ability to arm missiles like these with nuclear warheads. But it's a sign that India wants to rebuild confidence in its nuclear program. And it may just be the start of a new, broader openness.
Nick Childs, BBC News.
The French Environment Minister Dominique Voynet has accused the country's main nuclear reprocessing plant in Normandy of breaking safety regulations and leaking radioactive waste into the channel. The minister, who leads France's Green Party, said the Le Hague plant near Cherbourg had made a mistake in cleaning up a clogged discharge pipe and ordered the operation to be suspended. As Adi Akintonwa reports, the row has exposed the rifts which exist among the French government itself over the nuclear issue.
The huge Le Hague plant reprocesses spent nuclear fuel for a range of international clients. It claims that after treatment the waste is as stable as rock and says the nuclear processing industry's safety record is second to none. But its practice of discharging some of its waste into the sea has infuriated environmental groups, most notably Greenpeace, which earlier this year said it had found high levels of radioactivity in waters off the coast. This latest row comes after Greenpeace said it had obtained evidence that some 50 kilograms of additional waste had been leaked during an operation to clean the plant's 5-kilometre-long outlet into the English Channel. France's Environment Minister Dominique Voynet, who herself heads the country's Green Party, has confirmed that rules have been broken and has ordered the clean-up to be suspended. The government has said steps to change the situation will be made public in the coming weeks. But Greenpeace says it won't be satisfied until all nuclear discharge into the sea is stopped. Adi Akintomwa, BBC News.
Civil rights leaders in America are trying to marshal their forces against new laws which will end 30 years of preferential treatment for minorities in employment and in education. It follows a decision in California to end the policy known as affirmative action, designed to ensure more blacks, Latinos and Asians were given jobs and places at college. Brian Barron reports from one of California's top universities on the risk of a return to the racial divides of the 60s.
For 40,000 students, Berkeley is gateway to the field of dreams. But the ban on affirmative action means that only one black student is entering law college here.
I was shocked. I had originally thought that there would be at least a handful of students here, and that information just floored me.
Once we were prohibited from using affirmative action in our admissions procedures, we experienced quite a dramatic drop in the number of minority students that we offered admission to and to those who accepted.
But high-scoring Asian American students have increased in numbers as preferential treatment for blacks and Latinos, many of them from poor homes, is forbidden.
Now, the question is, what can you do to get more blacks into the elite schools? Well, exactly the same thing that Asians do to get into the elite schools, the same things that the whites do to get into the elite schools. Don't depend on somebody to put you there. Work hard and make it yourself.
The controversy has breathed new life into the old Civil Rights Coalition, who marched across the Golden Gate Bridge with the Reverend Jesse Jackson in command.
Anything that will hurt the children, the women of this nation, it is a disgrace and it needs to be changed today.
A large number of Californians voted in favor of this proposition. What does that tell us about public attitudes here?
In part because they were driven by fear and some by misinformation. But today, none are celebrating the fact that you'll have fewer women contractors, fewer blacks and browns in school. That's no cause to celebrate.
Many civil rights leaders say President Clinton has only paid lip service to supporting affirmative action. Affirmative action isn't quite dead yet, but its terminal condition could prove impossible to reverse. California's flinty approach to this divisive issue sets a precedent for other states. No less than 23 are planning similar measures. Brian Barron, BBC News, Northern California.
Bit of sport now. The defending champions Schalke have started this season's UEFA Cup competition with a 2-0 victory over Hajduk Split. Missing 9 regulars through injury or suspension, the German club had Belgian striker Michael Hossens to thank. He scored both their goals. Brazilian striker Ronaldo scored once as Inter Milan, runners-up last season, beat Neuchâtel of Switzerland. Other notable scores included an away win for Athletic Bilbao in Genoa against Sampdoria. Among other results, Ajax of Amsterdam were held to a surprise 1-1 draw against Maribor of Slovakia, and a surprise defeat for the English club Arsenal in Greece against Salonika. Elsewhere it was all square in Glasgow between Celtic of Scotland and Liverpool of England in the all-British affair. The other Glasgow club, Rangers, went down 2-1 in France against Strasbourg, and Atletico Madrid fought back from a goal down to beat Leicester City, while Lazio of Italy won 4-0 in Portugal against Vitória Guimarães. The suspended American distance runner Mary Slaney has been cleared to run again. The United States governing athletics body has announced that Slaney committed no doping offense last year, following a hearing in Chicago. The world governing body, the IAAF, banned Slaney last year for a disputed drugs test at the 1996 US Olympic trials. The test found Slaney to have a higher than acceptable ratio of testosterone, but the 38-year-old runner has consistently denied taking any banned substance. Sensation, that's the title of a new art exhibition which opens in London this week at the Royal Academy. And quite a sensation it's been causing in the British media. The most controversial item is a giant portrait of Britain's most notorious child killer. As our arts correspondent Nick Hyam has been finding out, such sensational work is hardly designed to soothe the spirit.
In the dignified galleries of the Royal Academy hangs the face of a child murderer. It's an image seen countless times in newspapers, but labelled art and exhibited here, it provokes a storm of outrage. Look closer and you see it's made up of hundreds of children's handprints. One artist member of the Academy has resigned in protest. Others voted only narrowly to allow it on their walls. The portrait of Myra Hindley is only one controversial work in the most controversial exhibition ever mounted by the Academy. The man responsible for including it makes no apology for that or for the rest of the show.
The idea that this painting in any way is extolling Myra Hindley is an absurd thing. In fact, it is confronting an issue which is real, which is what this exhibition is trying to do. And I mean, I think many of these artists, and I think all of the artists in their different ways, are kind of confronting real issues. And this work is just one amongst many.
This is the cream of the British avant-garde. The eggs are fresh each day. They're young British artists who delight to shock and challenge. Many of the images are sexually too explicit to broadcast. One X-rated room is closed to anyone under 18. Other works disturb in more subtle ways, like this tiny mannequin of the artist's dead father. One artist is exhibiting a cast of his own head, transported, packed in dry ice, displayed in a refrigerated cabinet. It's made from almost 10 pints of his own frozen blood. On first meeting it, some have vomited, others fainted, to the artist's surprise.
I think it's an extreme response, and it's also perhaps about self-disgust, because really, I don't find this disgusting. I'm quite come to terms with the fact that I have blood inside me.
The exhibits include the dead shark and cut-up animals preserved in formaldehyde, which made their creator, Damien Hirst, the most notorious young British artist. They all belong to Charles Saatchi, camera-shy millionaire and founder of 2 advertising agencies, seen here reflected in one of Hearst's cut-up cows. But it's not just some members of the Royal Academy who have doubts about these artists' work.
It's a very quick, throwaway kind of work, which you look at, are shocked by, and then you move on. It works in very much the same way that advertising works. It has the same creative philosophy as graphic design, insofar as what you see in sensation are works which illustrate ideas. Often they're not very good ideas. In the case of the Myra Hindley portrait, it's a pretty tasteless, rotten idea. And it seems to me it's no accident that all of this work is owned by perhaps the most eminent advertising executive of the last 20 years, who is someone who by definition knows the value of promotion, hype and marketing.
For the artists themselves, it's a chance to reach a much wider audience than normally see their work.
I'm sure there are people that go in there because they've probably read the newspapers and they think they're going there, then it's all going to be about shock and that's about it, and they'll just go there maybe because they want to hate it, or because they'll go because obviously there's a lot of media coverage that they wouldn't normally go to an art exhibition. The thing is, it will cover quite a wide range of different artworks, so yeah. It's in the middle of town, it's bound to get a big audience.
Now the audience can make its own judgment on works like Damien Hirst's Pig, which the organisers claim have made London the world's artistic capital.
Here at the Royal Academy, the young rebels find themselves at the very heart of a citadel of the establishment. Does that mean they've sold out? Looking at the work in this exhibition, provocative, self-confident, sometimes outrageous, it's hard to believe these young artists could ever lose their edge. Nick Hyam, BBC News at the Royal Academy.
And some news just in. Police in Pakistan say 5 trainee Iranian pilots have been shot dead in the city of Rawalpindi by unidentified gunmen. The attack came when their vehicle was ambushed at a crossroads in the city. We'll have more on that in our next bulletin in 35 minutes' time. And that's all from the newsroom for the moment.
Hello again and welcome to our look at the world weather. Let me start by having a look at the weather across parts of North America, because here we've seen some quite heavy rain in the northern states. Minneapolis, one of the wettest cities, 50 millimetres of rain falling in just 12 hours. Not far off the total we normally expect to see for the entire month of September, and we can see the reason why. A weather front has crossed this northern parts of the states in towards the Great Lakes. It's moving away to the east quite quickly, taking the rain with it, so it will eventually brighten up and dry up as the high pressure follows the weather front as it moves across to the eastern seaboard. Further south from here, we've got some big showers in central parts of America, more of those to come. I think September, October, some of the wettest months for this part of the world. And basically some dry weather further south into the southern hemisphere. There is a weather system that's moved away from the Falklands now, and I think apart from some quite cold conditions, a little bit of sunshine during the daytime as well. Of course, it's also spring in the southern hemisphere, and I think some spring-like temperatures back in towards the Great Bight, this weather front producing 1 or 2 showers, but high pressure really taking charge of the weather over the next few days in the eastern quarter of Australia. A bit different further east in New Zealand, a low-pressure system giving some quite brisk winds and plenty of cloud and outbreaks of rain from time to time as well. I think the warmest weather is much further north into northern reaches of Australia, and that continues across in towards Indonesia and Malaysia. David is the next typhoon to potentially affect Japan. Now, for the moment, it's quite a long way to the south, but through Thursday and Friday, it's going to come fairly close to the eastern seaboard of Japan, Honshu in particular, packing some very strong winds and, again, more rain to come here. Here's a summary, then, of some of the other stories across the world. Still hot in central parts of the Middle East, the monsoon showers still with us in the Asian subcontinent, and some cloud and outbreaks of rain and quite unsettled conditions across Scandinavia with wet and windy weather forecast over the next few days. I'll be back with more later on. Bye for now.
From the network that supports 250 correspondents in over 40 bureaux around the world. Reporters, next.
Continuing BBC Prime's Irish season, a country facing disaster.
We must all look in our hearts and ask ourselves what we've done to so displease the Lord.
A family fighting ruin.
We have lost our entire crop of potatoes.
I will not be turned off this land.
A universal story of passion and despair.
He was calling for me and I wasn't there.
You must not do this. It is done.
An event that would change the course of Western history.
It is cheaper to provide free passage to America than to keep them in the poorhouse.
The Hanging Gale, the story of the Irish famine on BBC Prime.
If you would like to receive BBC Prime, then contact your local cable or satellite operator, or call this number. Keep easily informed with teletext on BBC World.
It was an affair of the heart. He came to France and fell in love.
This is what it's all about down here, garlic.
With food.
And I'd like you to share this wonderful time with me.
An invitation to join Floyd en France.
Should be quite amusing.
At these times on BBC World.
This is BBC World. Now in World Focus, stories from our correspondents around the world. In Reporters.
Hello and welcome to the Reporters from BBC World. In the next half hour, we look at some of the stories around the world our correspondents have been investigating. Lise Doucette in Israel meets the families who want to pull Israeli soldiers out of Lebanon. Karen Coleman finds out about the dividing lines between Bosnia's communities. And Philippa Thomas sees for herself how America has been touched by the death of Mother Teresa. The Israeli government is coming under increasing public pressure to abandon one of the cornerstones of its defense policy. Since 1985, it has maintained a security zone in southern Lebanon. But Israeli forces there have suffered a string of military setbacks. In one of the most recent, 12 commandos were ambushed and killed by Hezbollah guerrillas. Now an increasing number of Israelis are demanding that the troops be withdrawn from southern Lebanon. The parents of soldiers are leading the way and are being backed by many politicians, as Lise Doucette reports from Jerusalem.
Another Israeli soldier is laid to rest with full military honours. Even in a country all too accustomed to the pain of war, this was too much to bear. 12 of Israel's best commandos died in Lebanon. 5 were killed in clashes with Lebanese Hezbollah guerrillas the week before. The Prime Minister himself found it hard to contain his grief and disbelief. On the streets, there's now mounting public pressure to find a way out. These parents are keeping track of how many lives are lost. 4 women with sons fighting in Lebanon established this group last March to urge their government to withdraw from the security zone it's occupied in southern Lebanon since 1985. Every time a soldier dies, they take to the streets. Their numbers are growing. Linda and Samuel Ben-Zvi were among the first to join. Their son, 21-year-old Eric, just finished his 3-year tour of duty in Lebanon.
And proud of him.
At their home outside Tel Aviv, they showed me photographs of Eric in uniform. Every Israeli teenager is expected to join the army. Like all parents, they never stopped worrying.
There's a phrase in Hebrew, ein ma lasot, nothing to be done. And I think often people felt that there was nothing to be done. The government tells us we're trying, but we must stay. I don't think at the end of the 20th century people are as willing to allow their governments to say nothing to be done. They want something to be done, and they want their voices heard.
For many Israelis, Lebanon has become their Vietnam, a deepening quagmire they can't seem to get out of. For a long time, it was taboo even to discuss it. But the more soldiers die, the louder the debate grows among the public and the politicians.
This prominent opposition figure has launched a cross-party movement.
One has to stand up and say, enough is enough. We don't need it. We don't have to be there. We have to accept the UN Security Council Resolution 425 and leave Lebanon.
Israel keeps its soldiers in Lebanon to protect its northern towns from attack. But some say this public debate only encourages Hezbollah forces.
The Hezbollah people look on TV cameras, and this is exactly what is boosting their activities. You don't want to reward them. You just want to let them understand that you are able to live with your agony, and at the same time it is strengthening you to further combat terrorism and not weakening you and making you collapse.
There are no simple solutions in Lebanon. Many believe any deal must also involve neighboring Syria as well. But recent disasters have led even cabinet ministers to suggest the troops should be pulled out. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
2 years after the signing of the Dayton Accord, tens of thousands of refugees in Bosnia-Herzegovina have yet to go home. One pilot scheme set up under the Dayton Agreement is meant to show how the return of refugees can be achieved. The project is centred on a small town near Mostar. But as Karen Coleman reports, the scheme has been fraught with difficulty and delay.
The reality of life as a refugee in Bosnia. 2 families share these tiny war-damaged houses. The owners want them back, and the refugees themselves just want to go home. Home is Stolac, a formerly mixed town not far away. It's now under the control of the Bosnian Croats, who forced these Muslims out in 1993.
Stolac is my town. My family lived in it since time immemorial, and I want to live there again, for I love everything in it. Every stone, every blade of grass, the way its river smells.
The flag of the self-declared Croat Republic of Herzegovina flies over Stolac. The town is seen as vital for the Croats, who want to keep their mini-state alive. Ironically, Stolac is the focus of a key pilot project forged under the 1995 Dayton Peace Agreement. Houses belonging to Muslims are being rebuilt to allow the refugees to come back, but it's beset with problems.
We've been going, especially in the last 10 days, through clear harassment of the visitors, the Bosniak visitors, as well as the workers. And every time this is happening, it is a clear sign that the Croat authorities are not willing to push the project and are in fact delaying its completion.
Muslim workers are bussed in every day to repair the refugee houses, but heavy protection is provided for the uneasy journey. Recently, the bus was stoned, and soldiers from the NATO-led peacekeeping force have to keep guard. Only 42 of the 100 families in the scheme have been able to return to the town so far, but almost 4,000 Muslims have registered to come back.
The authorities in place in Stolac now are the same as during the war. They're the ones who organized genocide and who took part in expelling Muslims from Stolac. And that's the main reason the refugees can't come back.
Life can be normal, though, for those who have returned to Stolac. This woman was one of the first to come home last June. So far, she's had little trouble, and she's managing to rebuild her old way of life.
Life as a refugee is no life. We were dead for 4 years, and now back home we are reborn again. The persecution and the life I had, I could not endure again. I'd rather be killed here.
The Croats can get along with former enemies, here the Serbs. They didn't want us to film this thriving market up the road. But the reluctance by the Croat authorities in Stolac itself to welcome back the Muslims and stop the harassment means that thousands who want to come back may not be able to return. Stolac is just one small pilot project that has had a lot of attention and effort. Yet it is still beset with difficulties, and it has only been partially successful. The refugee problem across the whole country is huge, and it shows how much there is still to do. Karen Coleman, BBC News, Stolac.
In an historic move, the people of Scotland have voted in a referendum to establish their own parliament. The new body will have limited powers over matters such as health and education, and will also have tax-varying powers. The decision comes after almost 300 years of rule from London. So just how distinct an identity does the Scottish nation have today? Tim Franks reports from Edinburgh.
These are the faces of Scottish pride. It's 1990. A swaggering English rugby team has come to Edinburgh to cap a successful season by crushing the Scots. But the Scottish team has different plans. Against the odds, it wins. The joy runs unconfined. In recent years, sport has become a crucible for Scottish identity. And at no time have the flames burnt more fiercely than when Scotland has played England. But how far is this down to a distinct sense of national identity? And how far down to a desire just to punish the old enemy?
When you play against the English, there's an added piquancy, because for a lot of Scots, they feel oppressed by the English, they're obsessed by the English. They feel themselves in opposition to the English. The English, on the other hand, really don't give a damn about us most of the time, I feel. They're not obsessed by us, nor by the Irish, nor by the Welsh. So when the English do condescend to play against us at football or rugby, that is the only time in which we can measure ourselves and say, now we've got you, now we'll have a fight, and now we'll see who'll win.
Stuart Bathgate's newspaper has a big readership in Scotland, far more than Welsh newspapers get in Wales. Scots are more interested in getting the view from their big cities, not so much from London. And some would go further still, pushing aside English altogether.
Man of the min, he's stonning and chovin, with a great for breers, he's warsling awa. Sic a winner it is, he disna gang skiting, with jukin and trumlin say feart gunnil fall.
Ishbel MacLeod has written a 10-volume dictionary of Scots, one of Scotland's 2 ancient languages, along with Gaelic. She says that more and more parents are asking schools to teach their children Scots.
I don't think you can separate Scots language and cultural or national identity. The two are closely interlinked, although they're not identical, obviously. But if you destroy a language, you destroy not only the words and the ways of talking, but you destroy the underlying culture and the way that people think and the way that people react.
All of which, say the true believers, goes to make up a coherent national identity.
The sense of identity in Scotland is very much a civic identity. It's not to do with where your great-grandfather was born, it's to do with where you happen to live now and whether you choose to make that the focus of your public self-consciousness, and that seems to be the case for most people in Scotland just now.
The focus for the tourist image of Scotland, though, remains the same as it ever was. Cynics say that tartan was just an English invention to subdue the restless Scottish clans, and they say that if that's your national instrument, well, you can keep it. And opponents of devolution are warning that those who want a separate parliament are being deluded by the superficial symbols of Scottishness.
Tim Franks reporting. Mother Teresa's influence was felt all over the world, and her funeral was attended by leading religious and political figures from every continent, including Hillary Clinton from the United States. During Mother Teresa's lifetime, Americans paid her the highest tribute. She was only the 5th non-American to be granted honorary citizenship. In death, she's been remembered across the nation with respect and affection, as Philippa Thomas has been finding out.
At St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, thousands attended a special memorial mass for Mother Teresa. Their tributes have been echoed through the week by worshippers of all denominations. Secular leaders, too, have voiced America's admiration. In June, she was awarded one of the nation's highest civilian honors, the Congressional Gold Medal.
Mother Teresa's life is witness that the humble can be famous, that the weak can be powerful, that the meek can have strength.
But perhaps most poignant in recent days have been the smallest services and individual memories of Mother Teresa's presence. Here, for example, at the National Shrine in Washington.
We've just lost, if you can use that word, Mother Teresa, but just as our Lord left behind his disciples, mainly his apostles and all the others who believed in him and loved him, so Mother Teresa has left her nuns behind.
The Little Sisters of the Poor work in Washington and in Calcutta. They say they've drawn inspiration from the example she set.
The people really loved Mother Teresa. Everyone would turn up to see her.
On her last visit, Mother Teresa signed this window, crafted in her honor. Each time she came, she impressed those she met with her absolute dedication to the poor.
With Mother Teresa, there was a great realization that if you helped her open a house for unwed mothers or open a house for AIDS victims, you knew the money was going to immediately reach those people.
Even for the very youngest Americans, like 11-year-old Varsha Datta, Mother Teresa's impact was clear.
Mother Teresa is famous because of all she did for the sick, poor, and dying. Mother Teresa is known as an angel and also as a saint of Calcutta.
This summer, Varsha chose Mother Teresa as her role model for a project at school.
Well, I thought that she helped a lot of people and now it's her time to rest.
That's a sentiment shared by those who knew Mother Teresa, those whose families came from India, even those with no connection at all. In the last few days, hundreds have queued to pay their respects here at the Indian Embassy. Mother Teresa was a role model to some and a saint to many. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Washington.
The leather industry in Bangladesh is one of the country's leading employers. Without the work it provides, many people would face destitution. But it's now clear that many of them are paying a terrible price. The industry has admitted that it's endangering the lives of its workers. The tanneries are also known to cause substantial damage to the environment. But campaigners say their appeals to successive governments to improve conditions have gone unheeded. Francis Harrison reports on the poisonous byproducts of Bangladesh's biggest foreign exchange earner.
The leather trade is the 4th biggest export business in Bangladesh. Shoes and bags made with some of the cheapest labour in Asia bring in hundreds of millions of dollars of foreign exchange a year. But the hidden cost is an environmental disaster in the heart of the world's fastest growing city. 95% of the tanneries are in one congested locality of Dhaka. It can take hours to manoeuvre trucks into the narrow lanes of this densely populated area. This is the 2nd biggest tannery in Bangladesh, processing hides with toxic chemicals that run straight into the normal drainage system. Tanners say the water is so acidic that even flies don't sit on the drains in this part of town. And the air is so heavy with chemicals that metal rusts in no time. But it's the cottage industries that are the biggest polluters. Instead of tanning the skins in vast drums, they do it in earthenware pots. These hides may one day be turned into a pair of shoes, but the man who processes the leather stands barefoot in the tanning agents. Workers and residents alike complain of skin ailments and breathing problems. The people living in shacks on top of industrial waste know they're at risk. They say the water from the tube well turns red if it's left to stand, and rice cooked in this water goes pink. The colour comes from chromium, a cancer-causing chemical used to tan the hides. Effluent from the tanneries has got into the underground water system and the nearby river, and nobody knows how many people may be at risk.
Our government has taken up certain steps to control the contamination of chromium as well as the contamination due to the effluent of the tanneries. Of late, a project is coming up which will set up a common effluent treatment plant here, and with the tanneries having their existing capacity. That means their capacity will not be allowed to expand. And if any of the farms chooses to expand its capacity, they have to move out.
I don't believe an effluent treatment plant will solve the environmental problem here or benefit the leather industry. Today or tomorrow we have to move away from this place because in a densely populated city like Dhaka, with a population of nearly 10 million people, such an environmentally polluting industry cannot be allowed to stay.
The tanners say they're more keen than the government for drastic action because many of them live in this area and suffer from the pollution and the terrible stench. They've spent years submitting proposals for relocation, which they say get lost in different ministries.
The tanneries are one of the worst polluters in Bangladesh. It's estimated that up to 2 million people are affected by the hazardous waste they spew out. Though they've been here for 50 years, still nothing has been done about the problem. Frances Harrison, BBC News, Dhaka.
Campaigning has started in Australia in an election to choose delegates for a special People's Convention on the monarchy. The decision to hold the convention was made before Princess Diana's death. The campaign was put on hold in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, but now the country is preparing to decide whether it wants to become a republic. Michael Peshart reports from Sydney.
Australia has shared fully in the grief over the princess's death, but already the Republican debate is right back on the political agenda. The former Prime Minister, Paul Keating, has noticeably mellowed in tone, but the message remains the same.
The choice by Australians to become a republic must be taken with courage and grace. And I say taken because it is the act of taking which will give our sovereignty its strength.
The Princess of Wales was enormously popular here. Her last visit on behalf of charity was less than a year ago. Even though she generated enormous excitement, the Republican debate was already gathering force then. And just before her death, the Australian Parliament decided to make the first concrete steps towards possible constitutional change. It voted in favour of what's been called a People's Convention to be held early next year.
Very pleased indeed that this ballot will now proceed and that the Constitutional Convention promised by the Coalition will now take place.
The Cabinet will appoint half the delegates to the all-important convention, which will decide whether to hold a referendum on abolishing the monarchy. The rest of the delegates will be elected via a special postal ballot. Within the next 3 months, every Australian will be asked to vote either for their local Republican or monarchist candidate. The Royalists remain confident, despite the tragedy surrounding the Princess.
The fact is that she was a wonderful ambassador for the Commonwealth and was recognised as such. But the role itself, the job, is done by the Queen. And the Queen has been impeccable right through her reign and will probably go down as the greatest monarch ever.
The two sides of the debate seem to have roughly equal support. The growing number of settlers from Asia, for instance, see little relevance in the monarchy. There had been a growing feeling that the right time for a republic might come at the end of the Queen's reign, but that idea's now being rejected.
It would be the worst time to act, a time of sorrow and a moment decided by chance, rather than as an independent act of will by Australians. In any case, her successor will immediately assume the throne.
The opinion polls say that since the princess's death, there has been a further increase in support for a republic. All sides are anxious to keep personalities out of the constitutional debate, but the convention will be the best test as to what effect, if any, her passing has had on the monarchy here. Michael Peshat, BBC News, Sydney.
Moscow has been celebrating its 850th birthday with a string of performances and shows from Russian and international stars. Luciano Pavarotti sang in Red Square and a crowd of 1.5 million saw the pop star Jean-Michel Jarre in concert. But as our Moscow correspondent Diana Goodman reports, not everybody believes they've benefited from the lavish three-day party.
An extravagant spectacle on Red Square helped to open the 3 days of celebrations. A fearsome dragon designed in Britain symbolised the forces of evil. Ivan the Fool sought help from the mayor of Moscow, Yuri Luzhkov, who spent £40 million on the city's anniversary. The show was staged by a British firm. It was not without problems.
Dealing with customs and getting equipment in, just silly administrative stuff. There's still a hangover to the past regime where you need 30,000 forms to do anything, and trying to get Russian actors and musicians to appear at rehearsals on time and do things on time. They're very slow.
But slow is not a word you can apply to Moscow's ambitious mayor. Some Russians believe his ultimate aim is to succeed Boris Yeltsin as president. In the midst of the celebrations, Mr. Yeltsin took time to remember the Princess of Wales. Russians loved her very much, he said. At another dramatic spectacle, Jean-Michel Jarre also paid a special tribute.
She was a friend. She was young, she was beautiful, she was generous, and she was also a rebel princess, and we're all going to miss her.
An estimated 1.5 million people attended the concert. But out in the suburbs, Muscovites living in run-down apartment blocks were not in the mood to celebrate. The 4 members of this family live, eat and sleep in one room.
It doesn't feel like a holiday. If they gave us a new flat, that would be a cause for celebration.
But in the centre of Moscow, the party was continuing. Pavarotti performed on Red Square. Mr. Luzhkov has shown that he knows how to throw a good party, but he's also managed to anger his critics, who say that spending so much money on celebrations in a city where millions live in poverty verges on being indecent. Diana Goodman, BBC News, Moscow.
And that's all from the reporters for this week. Join us at the same time next week. But from me, Krishnan Gurumurthy, goodbye for now.
On August the 31st, a black Mercedes like this left the Ritz Hotel in Paris. It was carrying Diana, Princess of Wales. Her journey was to end in tragedy and recrimination.
There was extreme tension on the scene.
But was the fatal car crash the fault of the driver, or should the responsibility lie with the pursuing photographers?
We always thought that one of us will have an accident someday.
Panorama investigates the fateful events of those final hours and talks to key witnesses, some of whom have never spoken before.
I can remember them putting their lens almost into the car.
A special edition of Panorama at these times on BBC World.
Next on BBC World, the World News.
Integrated. Scheduled to land.
Does technology really connect people? Or pave the way for a new corporate era? Is this factory producing essential medicine? Or simply creating the market for it? Is fetal surgery the patient's right? Or an act of violation? Because life isn't a science, but science affects your life. The BBC produces a science programme for every perspective. Horizon, over 30 years of the science of life.
Travel with the time machine after the news on BBC World.
With news on the hour, every hour, this is BBC World.
Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Anita McNaught. The headlines: the UN General Assembly opens its annual session with the main focus on internal reforms and the debts owed to it by the US. President Clinton says the United States is committed to the elimination of anti-personnel landmines, but not in Korea. And news of a breakthrough in negotiations on the future status of the Western Sahara. This year's annual session of the UN General Assembly has opened with a call for the organization's member states to embrace reform. The incoming president of the Assembly, Hannadi Udovenko, also said it was time for countries to unite for the future of the UN.
Another year, another General Assembly, but the theme is very familiar: reform, and how to make the UN fit for the challenges of the 21st century. The incoming president of the Assembly told delegates there were no serious obstacles to reform and urged them to unite to save the UN from becoming a relic of the past.
This issue will be at the center of this session, and I intend to support all efforts aimed at facilitating the process of reform and building a broad consensus that would unite member states in these efforts.
Despite the polite applause of the assembled ambassadors, diplomats are far from united over how to reform the UN. While the countries of the industrialized north emphasize efficiency, developing nations say that's just code for unacceptable cutbacks. There are also serious divisions over how to expand the Security Council and universal anger at the United States continuing debts to the UN.
I hope that the fact that the United States Congress, goaded by the new US administration, which has done a good job in pushing the Congress where it didn't very much want to go, will now come forward and settle those arrears, and will also, in the future, be prompt and full in their payments.
For the United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan, who rang the ritual peace bell to start the General Assembly, the next few months will be a serious test of his leadership and his efforts to restore the UN's battered credibility. Rob Watson, BBC News at the United Nations.
President Clinton has reaffirmed the United States' commitment to the elimination of anti-personnel landmines. But he said the situation in Korea posed a special problem with regard to achieving a worldwide ban. The US has already called an unexpected adjournment of an international conference in Oslo because it wants to delay the implementation of a draft treaty banning landmines. The International Committee of the Red Cross described the American attempt as an appalling prospect.
President Clinton's intervention followed a day and a night of telephone diplomacy with Canada and with Oslo to broker a last-ditch compromise. Instead of the immediate and total ban being demanded, the United States wants a 9-year delay because it believes landmines are vital to the defense of South Korea.
With the single exception of Korea, everyone in the world recognizes that Korea is a special problem because of the number of North Korean troops that are very close to Seoul. And we have been working with the people in Oslo to try to get an extended period of time to deal with that.
Washington also wants to be allowed to use anti-personnel and anti-tank mines together as defensive weapons.
We have another day or so to try to work through this. The United States would like to be a signatory to this agreement, but I have to be sure that we can fulfill our responsibilities and protect our troops.
The delay has caused some dismay in Oslo, where delegates of the 100 or so countries at the conference fear a watering down of the comprehensive treaty they're seeking. At the same time, there's little chance of getting countries like Russia and China to sign up without the Americans on board. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, a priceless crusader for the cause, with her visits to Bosnia and Angola, has increased the public pressure for a ban and left Washington isolated. But millions of mines remain active long after the end of the conflicts for which they were laid. It will require more hard work in the field and at the negotiating table before the world can call time on these deadly tools of war. Jim Fish, BBC News.
Police in Pakistan say unidentified gunmen have shot dead 5 Iranian military personnel in Rawalpindi. A Pakistani driver was also killed in the attack near the Pakistan Army General Headquarters. The 5 men were Iranian Air Force technicians on a training assignment in Pakistan. The gunmen escaped from the scene. Now, for more on that development, I'm joined on the line from Islamabad by our correspondent Zafir Abbas. Zafir, is there any indication yet of who is behind the killings?
No indication so far. Investigations have just started. The authorities are not prepared to speculate. The only possible explanation that is being given is that there is a possibility that it might be a part of the internal rivalry between various Iranian groups, which has often spilled over into Pakistan. The other explanation that is that they might have been targeted by some extremist Sunni militant groups. As in the past, some Iranian installations have been attacked, like Iranian Cultural Center in Multan, but the authorities say they would not like to speculate at this stage.
Why would these men, in particular, these Air Force technicians, have been targets?
Well, no particular explanation. Only reason could be they were Iranians. They were representing the government of Iran, so either they could have been targeted by the opposition factions who in the past have attacked Iranian officials in Pakistan or pro-government Iranians in Pakistan, or otherwise the extremist Sunni Muslim group which accuses Iran of supporting their rivals, the extremist Shias in Pakistan. So in the past they have targeted Iranians, and this could be a possibility.
Zafar Abbas, thank you very much for talking to us. Israeli officials have proposed a compromise deal to try to end the crisis caused by the occupation of 2 houses in East Jerusalem by Jewish settlers. But there's so far no sign of the settlers leaving. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has cancelled a planned visit to Romania in order to deal with the crisis.
The settlers have been here for 2 days and show no signs of leaving. They say they should be allowed to live anywhere they want in Jerusalem. The 2 buildings they're living in are owned by a Miami-based Jewish millionaire who plans to build more homes for Jews on the edge of this Arab neighborhood. The situation has embarrassed the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, even though Palestinians accuse Israel of involvement in the takeover. If he forces the settlers out, he'll lose the backing of right-wing groups that make up the bulk of his support. He also risks alienating US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who only last week had urged him not to take actions that would anger the Palestinians. Mr. Netanyahu is waiting for a ruling by the Attorney General, Eliakim Rubinstein, on whether he can expel the settlers by invoking national security. Palestinian leaders are now stepping up their pressure, warning of certain violence if the settlers don't leave. Philip Lote, BBC News.
The International Monetary Fund has started its annual meeting in Hong Kong, overshadowed by the financial crisis in Southeast Asia. In its half-yearly report, the IMF said the turmoil on the Asian markets, which began with the collapse of Thailand's currency in July, could have been avoided. The IMF says it spent 18 months warning the Thai authorities what would happen. A difficult year has been predicted for Thailand under the government's austerity plan. elsewhere, the future looks brighter. The IMF said the global economy would grow by 4.2% this year. Well, I'm joined from one of our central London studios by our business correspondent, Andrew Walker. Andrew, the IMF said it warned the Thai government that it was heading for problems. Is this being wise after the event?
Well, if the IMF is to be believed, and I see no reason why it shouldn't be, then it's rather more a case of being wise before the event. And I think it would be extraordinary had it not been the case that the IMF were warning Thailand in the run-up to the crisis. If you remember, the last major international economic crisis like this we had was Mexico at the end of 1994. The IMF was taken rather surprise, and after that it created a system of monitoring to identify early warning signs. Thailand was showing some of these early warning signs, notably a very large deficit in its international trade. The IMF certainly weren't the only people that noticed that something might be going wrong. I have no doubt at all that they would have been telling the Thai authorities in fairly clear terms that what kind of policies they'd need to take to try and prevent this sort of thing happening.
Was there any aspect of the IMF criticism you think is unfair?
Well, there is one aspect in which I think you could say that it's easy for the IMF to say that, and that's this. One of the things they were calling for the Thais to do was to move to a more flexible exchange rate policy. They'd pegged the currency, the baht, for many years, and that had gradually made Thailand become much less competitive. Now, it's easy to say become more flexible, but actually history has proved that it's actually very difficult indeed for countries to make a kind of orderly exit from managed exchange rate policies to something more flexible. It is very often the case that the financial markets do experience a period of great turbulence during that transition, and I think it would have been very difficult for Thailand to have avoided these problems altogether.
Are we seeing the much lauded Asian tigers finally faltering here?
Well, in the case of Thailand, clearly there is an element of that. Thailand is going to have at least 1 or 2 years of comparatively, by recent Thai standards, extremely slow growth. And for the Thai people, accustomed to very rapid growth, that's going to be a pretty painful experience. In the rest of, among the other East Asian tigers, I think what we're going to see is a bit of a slowdown in economic growth, 1 or 2 percentage points a year. That will be unwelcome, I have no doubt, but I don't really think it's a case of the tigers falling flat on their feet, just their stride faltering a little.
Andrew Walker, thank you very much indeed. The United Nations mediator for the disputed territory of Western Sahara has announced agreement on ways of resolving the conflict through a referendum. The mediator, the former American Secretary of State James Baker, said Morocco and its opponents in the Western Sahara, the Polisario Front, had agreed on a code of conduct for the referendum, which would resolve whether Western Sahara should be independent or be incorporated into Morocco.
It's a dispute that has defied negotiators for decades, but it now seems former US Secretary of State James Baker has finally cracked it. He's brokered an agreement between Moroccan officials and Western Sahara's Polisario Front aimed at settling the conflict in the Northwest African territory. The breakthrough came after 3 days of talks in Houston and earlier discussions in Lisbon and London.
The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and we may or may not see full implementation of this settlement plan for the Western Sahara that was first agreed to back in 1991.
Baker's role in the talks marks his return to the diplomatic world he inhabited during the Bush administration. Acting at the request of UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, he's been trying to establish some ground rules for a referendum to allow voters to choose between independence for Western Sahara or integration with Morocco. Morocco has laid claim to the territory based on historical links which go back over generations. The Western Sahara rebels, known as the Polisario Front, have been fighting for independence ever since Spain abandoned the territory in 1976. A ceasefire 6 years ago, monitored by a UN observer force, ended the guerrilla conflict between the two sides. The United Nations has been trying to organize a referendum for years. The original one was set for 1992, but the protracted wranglings over who should be allowed to vote meant it never got underway. When it does take place, the outcome will determine whether this mineral-rich area should be incorporated into Morocco, which already controls most of the former Spanish colony in northwest Africa. 80,000 voters are expected to take part in the referendum, which is due to be held around July of next year. Helen Sawyer, BBC News.
The Ulster Unionists have renewed their call for Sinn Féin to be thrown out of the multi-party talks on the future of Northern Ireland following yesterday's bomb explosion in County Armagh. Despite IRA denials, the leader of the Protestant Ulster Unionist Party, David Trimble, has accused the organisation of being involved in the attack at Market Hill. Later this morning, the Unionists will continue their discussions on whether to attend the negotiations.
The Market Hill bomb presents problems for both Unionists and Sinn Féin. While it may have been blamed on a Republican splinter group, many Unionist people see no distinction with the IRA. And its hand is seen in the bombing by a leader of one of the two small loyalist parties.
We are somewhat sceptical in that when the IRA had no ceasefire, the Continuity Army seemed to be on ceasefire, and when the IRA are not on ceasefire, or they are on ceasefire, the Continuity Army are not. And one has to look, I think, very carefully at that.
The bombing means Sinn Féin yet again must convince the other talks participants of its commitment to non-violent means.
We know that there's a lot of poisoning going on. We know that people are hardballing, but they're really playing into the hands of the enemies of the peace process. And those who planted that bomb today are the enemies of the peace process.
And while the Ulster Unionist leader, David Trimble, has raised concerns about Sinn Féin's presence, the major obstacle to his party's joining the talks appears to be agreeing a set of rules for its participation.
I'm afraid those people who laid out timetables earlier this year did so without regard to the seriousness of the issues that were involved. And it can't all be just wrapped up as quickly as some people would like. But we hope that there will be a way of dealing with the issues that have been raised.
The Market Hill bomb may delay Ulster Unionist participation, but the indications are it won't stop it eventually meeting Sinn Féin at the talks. Chris Capper, BBC News, Belfast.
Still to come, 4 litres of frozen blood cast in the shape of the artist's head. Just one of the shockers at London's latest art sensation. The government of Papua New Guinea has warned that parts of the country could face severe food shortages as a result of a prolonged drought which has affected highland regions. The drought's been attributed to the onset of the El Niño weather phenomenon, which has been disrupting weather patterns on both sides of the Pacific.
The magnificent highlands of Papua New Guinea are normally a lush green at this time of year. 8 months of drought has left vast tracts of jungle ravaged by bushfires. Cash crops have withered and died, and now the government's warned that if rain doesn't come soon, a serious famine could be in the offing, leaving up to 1 million people facing starvation. The worst drought in 50 years has been blamed on the El Niño, a sudden reversal of currents and a weakening of trade winds across the Pacific. Scientists warn that the current El Niño could be the biggest on record. Highland villagers are reported to be migrating away from the worst affected areas. So far, 80 deaths have been attributed to the drought. Families are selling their most valuable possessions, notably prized pigs, to buy food. There are already reports of starvation. Coffee, a big export crop, has been badly hit, and as river levels drop, big copper and gold mines have been brought to a standstill. The government's announced an emergency aid package, and Australia's also provided assistance. As other relief agencies and the World Bank work to assess the extent of the crisis, the Prime Minister, Bill Skate, called on the nation to unite in the face of a hard year ahead. Let's pray for rain to come soon, he was quoted as saying. Jonathan Miller, BBC News.
The French Environment Minister, Dominique Voynet, has accused the country's main nuclear reprocessing plant in Normandy of breaking safety regulations and leaking radioactive waste into the channel. The minister, who leads France's Green Party, said the Largue plant near Cherbourg had made a mistake in cleaning up a clogged discharge pipe and ordered the operation to be suspended. As Adi Akintonwa reports, the row has exposed the rifts which exist within the French government itself over the nuclear issue.
The huge Le Hargue plant reprocesses spent nuclear fuel for a range of international clients. It claims that after treatment the waste is as stable as rock and says the nuclear processing industry's safety record is second to none. But its practice of discharging some of its waste into the sea has infuriated environmental groups, most notably Greenpeace, which earlier this year said it had found high levels of radioactivity in waters off the coast. This latest row comes after Greenpeace said it had obtained evidence that some 50 kilograms of additional waste had been leaked. during an operation to clean the plant's 5-kilometre-long outlet into the English Channel. France's Environment Minister, Dominique Voynet, who herself heads the country's Green Party, has confirmed that rules have been broken and has ordered the clean-up to be suspended. The government has said steps to change the situation will be made public in the coming weeks. But Greenpeace says it won't be satisfied until all nuclear discharge into the sea is stopped. Adi Akintomwa, BBC News.
Now, with the latest from the markets and all the rest of the world's business news, here's Anna Jones.
Thanks very much, Anita. Japan's securities watchdog has filed a criminal complaint against Yamaichi Securities, the smallest of Japan's big four securities houses, in the latest stage in the country's high-profile racketeering scandal. The complaint alleges that 5 Yamaichi executives made illegal payoffs totaling $650,000 to compensate a corporate racketeer for investment losses. A complaint has also been filed against the racketeer himself, Ryuichi Koike. He's already been at the centre of a scandal which has ensnared Japan's biggest security house, Nomura Securities, and its leading bank, Daiichi Kanyo. Well, that news upset the Tokyo Stock Exchange, which was already disappointed that the IMF had predicted a weak growth rate for Japan in 1997 of just 1.1%. The Nikkei closed sharply down as a result, down 291 points there at 17,683. Meanwhile, Japan's contentious trade surplus jumped for the 5th month in a row in August, giving Tokyo unwelcome news to take to this weekend's meeting of G7 nations. The overall surplus rose 113.6% over last year's figure. That's almost double expectations. And its surplus with the US jumped nearly 60%. Dollar's now trading against the yen there at 120.59. In Germany, the Bundesbank has said that it must act early to nip price pressures in the bud if low inflation is to be maintained. In its monthly report, the central bank said wage increases must stay moderate to offset any pressures arising from the higher cost of imported goods. Well, all that adds to already rife speculation about a rise in German interest rates. The dollar now putting on weight against the mark there, though, trading now at 177.40. Let's have a quick look at how the European markets are starting their day. London FTSE looking good there, up 45 points. And that's all the business news at the moment. Now back to Anita.
Thank you, Anna. Sensation is the title of a new art exhibition which opens in London this week at the Royal Academy. And quite a sensation it's been causing in the British media. The most controversial item is a giant portrait of Britain's most notorious child killer. As our arts correspondent Nick Himes been finding out, such sensational work is hardly designed to soothe the spirit.
In the dignified galleries of the Royal Academy hangs the face of a child murderer. It's an image seen countless times in newspapers, but labelled art and exhibited here, it provokes a storm of outrage. Look closer and you see it's made up of hundreds of children's handprints. One artist member of the Academy has resigned in protest. Others voted only narrowly to allow it on their walls. The portrait of Myra Hindley is only one controversial work in the most controversial exhibition ever mounted by the Academy. The man responsible for including it makes no apology for that or for the rest of the show.
The idea that this painting in any way is extolling Myra Hindley is an absurd thing. In fact, it is confronting an issue which is real, which is what this exhibition is trying to do. And I mean, I think many of these artists, and I think all of the artists in their different ways, are kind of confronting real issues. And this work is just one amongst many.
This is the cream of the British avant-garde. The eggs are fresh each day. They're young British artists who delight to shock and challenge. Many of the images are sexually too explicit to broadcast. One X-rated room is closed to anyone under 18. Other works disturb in more subtle ways, like this tiny mannequin of the artist's dead father. One artist is exhibiting a cast of his own head, transported, packed in dry ice, displayed in a refrigerated cabinet. It's made from almost 10 pints of his own frozen blood. On first meeting it, some have vomited, others fainted, to the artist's surprise.
I think it's an extreme response, and it's also perhaps about self-disgust, because really, I don't find this disgusting. I'm quite come to terms with the fact that I have blood inside me.
The exhibits include the dead shark and cut-up animals preserved in formaldehyde, which made their creator, Damien Hirst, the most notorious young British artist. They all belong to Charles Saatchi, camera-shy millionaire and founder of 2 advertising agencies, seen here reflected in one of Hirst's cut-up cows. But it's not just some members of the Royal Academy who have doubts about these artists' work.
It's a very quick, throwaway kind of work, which you look at, are shocked by, and then you move on. It works in very much the same way that advertising works. It has the same creative philosophy as graphic design, insofar as what you see in sensation are works which illustrate ideas. Often they're not very good ideas. In the case of the Myra Hindley portrait, it's a pretty tasteless, rotten idea. And it seems to me it's no accident that all of this work is owned by perhaps the most eminent advertising executive of the last 20 years, who is someone who by definition knows the value of promotion, hype and marketing.
For the artists themselves, it's a chance to reach a much wider audience than normally see their work.
I'm sure there are people that go in there because they've probably read the newspapers and they'll think they're going there, then it's all going to be about shock and that's about it, and they'll just go there maybe because they want to hate it, or because they'll go because obviously there's a lot of media coverage that they wouldn't normally go to an art exhibition. The thing is, it will cover quite a wide range of different artworks, so yeah, it's in the middle of town. It's bound to get a big audience.
Now the audience can make its own judgment on works like Damien Hirst's Pig, which the organisers claim have made London the world's artistic capital.
Here at the Royal Academy, the young rebels find themselves at the very heart of a citadel of the establishment. Does that mean they've sold out? Looking at the work in this exhibition, provocative, self-confident, sometimes outrageous, it's hard to believe these young artists could ever lose their edge. Nick Hyam, BBC News at the Royal Academy.
Now, a reminder of our main stories. This year's annual session of the UN General Assembly has opened with a call for the organisation's member states to embrace reform. The focus of the session is likely to be the Secretary-General Kofi Annan's July reform package aimed at streamlining the UN bureaucracy. And President Clinton says the United States is committed to the elimination of anti-personnel landmines, but not in Korea. And that is all from the newsroom for the moment.
Hello again. There's some very interesting weather around the world at the moment. Let's start in Europe, where there's been some quite heavy showers developing in the Mediterranean. Here in Tripolis in Greece, 29 millimetres of rain falling in just 12 hours. Well, there's the band of cloud that produced that rain. It's drifted gently away to the east, but there's more to come. Another band of quite dark cloud this. This is a thunderstorm that's moving along northern parts of Algeria, just crossing into Tunisia now. And some thunderstorms on this system as well, and they're going to drift gently eastwards through the rest of today, potentially bringing some of those showers back across Sicily, Malta and the southern parts of Italy. So the forecast, I think, through Wednesday and Thursday is still rather unsettled for this part of the Mediterranean. But further north, much of Central Europe dry, a bit cold during the night time, and still very windy and unsettled up to Scandinavia, because here an area of low pressure generating strong winds and also some sleet and snow over the high ground, especially the central part of Norway and Sweden. Lighter winds further south. That does mean some mist and fog first thing in the morning into these central areas, but in general warm during the daytime. Top temperature, for instance, around 28 or 29 Celsius. Now further south into Africa, here some of these dark areas of cloud are also isolated thunderstorms. There's probably going to be more for the rest of Wednesday and through Thursday. Some dry weather in the south, Cape Town a bit cooler than it has been, 21 degrees here, and still warm and dry for much of the Middle East through both Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. The top temperature in Kuwait of 41 Celsius. Into Asia now, and we're keeping a very close eye on the winds developing off the coast of Japan. We have another typhoon. The winds getting a little bit closer, those very strong winds. They're going to affect the eastern seaboard of Honshu in particular as that storm gets a bit closer through Thursday and Friday. So a brief respite from the rain and the wind, but as Typhoon David gets nearer, we are going to see those strong winds return and plenty more rain to come. That's the forecast. Bye for now.
Make a date with Carrie Fisher in LA.
And Mom, Dad, 2 kids and a dog. It is not. The reality is that dating has become a business deal.
I couldn't do anything for her in the industry.
At least she told you out front. You didn't have to waste time.
Who needs sex when you've got test tubes?
Nobody knows what the rules are here.
Why not get divorced again and again?
I love my work. I love my dogs. My husband, yes, but...
Carrie on Hollywood. At these times on BBC World.
Travel with the Time Machine, next on BBC World.
Do you feel any guilt about anything? No, I don't feel it. No blood on your hands? No.
35 to 40,000 down to less than 500 or 600 in the course of 24 hours.
Coming here in peace, the team may be met by fear, anger, or even violence.
Clearly world focus programming at these times on BBC World.
This is BBC World. Now in World Living we look back at 33 years of tomorrow's world in Tomorrow's World Time Machine.
Hello there, welcome back to the TW Time Machine, the programme that uncovers what's happened to the weird and wonderful inventions that have featured on Tomorrow's World over the years.
And we've got a cracking show for you tonight. As well as some surprising updates, there's a great mix of classic clips you've begged us to show again.
On tonight's show, it's the real Spider-Man. How Tomorrow's World helped this man get a grip.
Also, from chronic stammerer to award-winning after-dinner speaker, the inspiring story of Jack Webster.
And in Raymond Baxter's rock and roll years, a young prince is crowned, and Tomorrow's World carries out its most nail-biting live experiment. But what was the year?
First, to get us off to a flying start, Kevin Brown from Glasgow asks, whatever happened to the flying dustbin? For those of you who don't remember this, the flying dustbin was part of an ambitious program by the US military to develop a personal flying machine. It all began with the rocket belt.
The rocket belt made its name in the 60s in the James Bond film Thunderball. At the time, this rocket-powered backpack seemed like the answer to a commuter's prayer. Unfortunately, it had one problem that even 007 might have found a bit daunting. It could only stay in the air for 21 seconds. Enthusiasm for the personal flying machine began to wane over the next decade, until the arrival of the flying dustbin, or WASP-2 as it prefers to be known. Its small turbofan engine is a modified version of the cruise missile engine. This gives it enough thrust to fly at 60 miles per hour for up to half an hour. And because the pilot stands on the WASP-2, rather than having to wear it on his back, he can carry more fuel in the side panels.
I want to know how many people fell out of the back of that thing before that bloke got it to fly so smoothly.
We'll never know, but it's possibly quite a few, because the sad truth is that the flying bin has been trashed. There are no plans to develop it any further, which is a real shame, because I think most of us would have liked to have had a go in one of those.
Yeah, wouldn't we just? Now, I've had a letter from Zoe Gray from Midlothian, from Bonnyrigg, and she says, whatever else you do in this series, you must take a look at an old Tomorrow's World invention my father worked on called the Stammer Jammer. Well, we did take a look, and we chanced upon an inspiring and moving story.
This man, Robert Burns, whose genius comes flashing at you like sheet lightning on a summer's eve.
Giving a speech like this would once have been impossible for Jack Webster, because he used to be a chronic stammerer.
I had a stammer from the day I could speak, and it's obviously very awkward when you go to school. Children tend to mock you a bit. My father couldn't understand it. He got impatient with me, what was wrong with me type thing. So the stammer was always an embarrassment to me, obviously. You don't like to hear yourself stammering. It's awkward for you and it's awkward for other people, and it's a big bugbear.
Despite his stammer, Jack became a successful journalist. A feature writer, he interviewed famous stars all over the world.
I had to interview Charlie Chaplin and Muhammad Ali, Sophia Loren, whoever it was. I just had to do it. And indeed, my editor at the Daily Express, he used to think it was an advantage because people tended to speak more so that I would have to say less.
Then one day, Jack's editor sent him on an assignment that was to change his life. It was to investigate a device called the Stammer Jammer, officially known as the Edinburgh Masker, invented by a speech therapist called Anne Dewar.
I was sceptical because I thought this was just another gimmick, in fact, but I was astonished to find what she had done.
Jack wasn't the only journalist covering this story. Michael Rodd also went to look at the Stammer Jammer in action, along with Walter Buchanan, a severe stammerer.
Would you mind reading this to me, and we'll see how it goes. Starting from here. Such words as... Fair enough, I think that's given us enough anyway. Right. Now, I think we'll try with this on. See what happens.
The technique was simple. It's based on the observation that if a stammerer can't hear their own voice, they tend to stop stammering. A microphone attached to the stammerer's neck triggers a noise which the person hears in their headphones every time they speak.
Firewood. Now let's see what happens with Baa Black Sheep.
Baa Black Sheep, have you any wool? Yes, sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, 1 for the little lad that lives down the lane.
That's excellent.
Dramatic.
Although it was awkward to wear, many stammerers found they didn't have to put up with the masker forever, because with practice they were able to speak quite fluently without it. 20 years after Jack Webster first met Anne Dewar, we reunited them to talk about their original meeting.
Was he really cynical?
He was sure it was a gimmick, but then everyone is at first. It's silly, it's magic, and it shouldn't work. I still look at it most surprised it does.
Then you put it on to a stammerer, the worst stammerer I had ever heard in my life, and I just couldn't believe the result. And then I think I asked if I could try it on myself. He said, yes, have a go. So I did. And I took off like a bird. It was really a liberation. You felt so free, you were flying. And that began to teach me the rhythm of speech.
You have a lovely voice, and it's lovely to hear it, because the accent came through and it hadn't been spoiled.
Now, I had been asked if I would make a speech at King's College in Aberdeen about my great-grandfather, Gavin Gregg, who was a poet and playwright. And up till then, I wouldn't have contemplated that. But then I thought, well, maybe this is the moment to try this out. So I went to Aberdeen, and I made a speech. I spoke for an hour, and I'm told I spoke perfectly.
But Jack was one of the lucky ones. Frustratingly, the masker went out of production several years ago, and since then, it's been virtually impossible to get hold of one.
But there was no doubt that the masker had worked wonders for Jack, because it enabled him to take up a new job as a television presenter.
I wandered out on many a clear winter night and gazed upwards at that weird display of light in the sky.
Suddenly, Jack was in demand. public speaking engagements started to pour in. Jack's reputation as a public speaker grew and grew, until last year he received the ultimate accolade. Following in the footsteps of speakers such as Peter Ustinov and Terry Waite, he received Britain's Speaker of the Year award. The following month, Reader's Digest ran a story about how the masker had changed Jack's life. At the end of the article, there was a short note offering the rights to produce the masker to any company that was interested. Thanks to that footnote, the masker's going back into production. An electronics company has already started making the original version, but it's also going one stage further.
We're going to produce the masker exactly as it is. That's what people are used to. However, over the next 4 or 5 months, the intention is to modernize it. We will then produce a miniaturized version. We'll still have to have a tiny throat mic. We'll still have to have the earpieces. But between the two, there will be a little box about the size of your thumbnail.
Which of course is great news. The machine that made such a big difference to Jack's life can at last help a whole new generation of stammerers.
What a lovely story.
Yeah, and he really is the most charming man. Good writer too.
Good stuff. Right, it's time once again to raid the Tomorrow's World video vaults for another edition of Raymond's Rock and Roll Years.
Tonight, in my rock and roll years, we go back to the year mankind took a giant leap. Tamla Motown reigned supreme in the pop charts, and on Tomorrow's World, we were fascinated by things that went bang. The year, 1969. Good times for Cliff and good times for the Soviets as they successfully transferred cosmonauts from one spacecraft to another for the first time. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Tomorrow's World unveiled a car that was out of this world.
The President's car, bulletproof, bomb-proofed and weighing 3 tons, has a plastic panel top that's thicker and tougher than the windows in America's fighter planes. Dropping a Molotov cocktail on top of it would be about as effective as scratching it with your fingernails. Built into the rear wing of the car is a hydraulic switch for lifting a handrail. It's for the President's personal bodyguard of Secret Service agents. If the car has to accelerate in an emergency, they can hang on with one hand and shoot with the other.
And it was MOT'd and ready to roll for the inauguration of the 37th President of the United States.
Difficult to know whether to call this a car or a tank. This armor-plated bomb-proof floor as well.
Here is the inventor of the bulletproof shield, Mr. Bill Walton. Going to try it out for us. It fits on very simply. As you've seen, our marksman is Jim Galloway. How do you feel about shooting at a live target, Jim?
Well, I don't exactly enjoy it, but the object is to save life, and I feel the cause is a good one.
In your own time, fire, Jim. That made you jump a bit. Teenage tears and broken hearts. Why are you crying? It was the day a bachelor Beatle said, I do. Ah, young love. But for my colleague James Burke, it was a lonesome life on the range as he tested the very latest in laser technology.
What you're looking at now is the sky blue light of a pulsed argon laser. The scientists who made it say that this small hand portable is a forerunner of something even smaller, something maybe the ladies can slip into their handbags.
Things were far more civilized when Charles was crowned Prince of Wales. On Tomorrow's World, our brushes with danger continued.
2 ounces of explosive, that's all. Correct. Good gracious alive. Just look at that. Ben, can you get me the other piece from round the back there? That is what it punched out of that. Just look at that. That is one of the most remarkable things I think I have ever seen.
And at the time, this was one of the most remarkable things I had ever heard.
All these instrumental sounds were made electronically by one man, Michael Vickers, on a single musical instrument. It's called the Moog synthesizer. The days of the one-man band are back again.
But this was the highlight of the year.
We have a liftoff. I'm going to step off the lamb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Apollo 11,
Yes, indeed.
the event of a lifetime.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
Fantastic. I can remember being allowed to stay up late to watch that.
I was far too young.
Yeah, right. Now, there's plenty more to come in tonight's Time Machine, including a surprise guest appearance in our Curse of Tomorrow's World feature.
But first, as we all know, getting an MOT for your car can sometimes be a troublesome business. So just imagine trying to get one for a supertanker. Well, actually, the first part's quite easy. All you need to do is make sure you never miss Tomorrow's World, as this gripping tale proves.
My name is Paul Boyce. I work for a small company of marine ultrasonic surveyors. Basically, we provide MOTs for ships.
We specialise in marine surveys on extremely large vessels like the American Cormorant. It's got thousands of tons of steel, and we've got to survey and inspect every inch of it.
This is one of the water ballast tanks of the Cormorant. They're absolutely enormous. They wouldn't disgrace a good-sized cathedral.
There are lots of nooks and crannies that are sometimes extremely difficult to get to. Some of these areas are so awkward that it really is a major problem to get at, to inspect them properly and safely.
Can you imagine just how hard it is to survey every inch of this?
Just so happened that one day a colleague of mine came into the office saying that he'd seen a program on Tomorrow's World about a thing called a gripper.
What makes the gripper successful is the high strength of the magnet package. The small package has approximately 850-pound force to any steel surface.
I've got to be honest, at first I thought it was a complete spoof. Being able to walk up vertical steel surfaces like Spider-Man, I just really didn't believe.
But with a lot of help from Tomorrow's World, we actually tracked down the manufacturer, which was in the States, the government laboratories at Los Alamos. They were really developed for the American military. Why they got them developed, I don't know, but I'm really, really glad that they did, because it makes our job so much easier. And now we're the proud possessors of the grippers here in the UK. This is one of the hand grippers. They're very small and compact, but they pack a powerful punch. And you can see how rigid those are. It'll take 800 pounds of force to actually remove it from bare steel plate. There's a special cam on the side that'll let us ease it up and take it off and then reposition it. Normally what we do is use our hands and feet rather than rely on a mechanical device like this. But with a little bit of practice and all the right safety precautions, it's a very easy, very simple system to operate.
Now, as you know, each week we line up a rogues gallery of inventions that never quite lived up to their early promise. Be prepared. Here comes the curse of Tomorrow's World.
Good evening and welcome to our darkened studio. Dark so that we can be switched on to the very latest in fashion. Sparkly, isn't it?
The key to all-weather smartness, permanent shaped clothes made by a unique baking process. They can be washed, dried anyhow and worn again without needing even a slight touch from the iron.
And finally, the latest idea from California. What is it? Well, it's an electronic antiperspirant, of course, and each bit has been designed to fit the different parts of the body. And it's claimed that 8 half-hour sessions with it will stop you sweating for up to 6 weeks.
It's rather in the knee. Now, about watches. I'm a shocker for timekeeping, but now they've given me a wristwatch that never needs winding up. The back of it is worn by my wrist, converting heat into electricity.
OK, are you ready for this? Take a look at these.
Oh, goodness, look at all those microamps I'm generating. Oh, think what you could do if these things were stuck all over you.
Here, we have what the French manufacturers call an educative toothbrush.
Now I can see you. Now I can't.
Designed, they say, to teach us how to clean our teeth. And it's all done by music.
Yes, they are indeed sideways-looking glasses.
A tune, in this case a phrase from Love Story, is repeated over and over again for at least a minute and a half.
Stupid? Well, yes, as glasses go, they're about as useful as a chocolate teapot.
Centrally heated socks.
A ready knotted tie with a zip along the loop.
This represents a giant leap forward in the technology of the pith helmet.
It's a personal radio which soaks up the sun while I do.
It's solar-powered to provide a cooling breeze that passes over the fevered brow.
I just knew it. There had to be a snag.
If you're in the cloudy monsoon season...
No sun, no music.
There you are, you see. I bet you didn't remember Kenneth Williams trying his hand at tomorrow's world. Now, back in 1984, we ran a story about the quest for the perfect baked bean, one that's full of flavour, bursting with natural goodness, but one you could enjoy without fear of embarrassing repercussions, if you catch my drift. Well, shortly after we ran the original story, it all went quiet on the silent bean front, until recently, when our researchers caught wind of some intriguing new work going on in Cambridge. Kieran Prenderville begins the story.
For many years now, scientists have been trying to find the silent bean. The problem is that baked beans contain certain molecules that can't be digested. So, when these molecules pass down the digestive system, they remain unchanged till they reach the lower intestine, where they meet eventually with bacteria, which naturally live in this part of the gut. And their bacteria feast away on these molecules, and as they do so, they produce gas, and it's this gas that's responsible for those embarrassing moments. But now, by exposing the beans to radiation, some of the links holding the molecules together are broken, and these smaller molecule units can be digested in the body.
All these years later, and the quest for a polite bean is continuing here in a quiet corner of Cambridge.
Good morning, Howard.
Morning,
Good
Colin.
To see you.
Good
Welcome
to see
to
you.
Beers and Beans.
Thank
Come
you
on
very
in. We're in the dining room.
Colin Leakey is a scientist with a lifelong passion for pulses, and he's getting ready to introduce to the world his dream bean.
Well, I was given the challenge in Uganda in 1969 to try and make beans better for feeding babies. And I didn't really know where to start. But I did discover from reading in the literature that the NASA administration had been concerned with the problem of gas production by beans in space. They were looking at what astronauts should eat in the future. And that set me off thinking about the fact that one perhaps could breed beans which were more digestible. But I didn't make much progress at the time until by chance I happened to be working for a very large company who happened to can beans and was sent to Chile. And when I was in a market in southern Chile, I came across market ladies selling beans. And for the same quantities of beans, some of the beans were nearly twice as expensive as other beans. So I thought, aha, this is interesting. Why are those beans so expensive? So I asked the ladies, and they giggled. And so I rubbed my tummy and grimaced a little, and they nodded. And thus I discovered that in Chile for many years, the good folk of Chile knew that they had beans which were less gassy than other beans.
But how do you prove that the Chileans were right?
Well, the difference between hearsay and science is measurement, and therefore one had to develop a measuring technique. And I did it again in an extremely simple way, based effectively on 2 balloons and some winemaking equipment. And what we have is 2 balloons. This one is outside, is the gas container. Happens to be a sausage balloon and say congratulations, but that's a bit of a joke. This one, which has lots of holes in, is inside, and when the whole thing is on stream, the gas which passes from here into this balloon, both taps are open, and when the balloon, as happens, occasionally blows up, one can close the taps, disconnect, and then one can measure the volume in this balloon by the application of Archimedes' principle. Easy.
Right, so this is the section that just goes inside you.
That's the collection section.
I hope you'll forgive me for not wanting to try this out
I'll
right
forgive
now.
you. No. we won't try this right now. But
instead, why don't we go outside and have a look at some of your beans
that.
in the field?
Let's do that.
So tell me, Colin, how have you developed these beans?
Well, what we decided to do was to take two parental lines, both of which were fairly well adapted in Northern Europe. One, in fact, came from Sweden, and the other was a variety bred some time ago in France. But both the parental lines were something which would mature and produce a decent crop in Britain. And I knew, or hoped I knew, that I could actually reproduce what the Chileans would think was a Chilean bean.
Colin's theory is that the Chilean bean lacks the ingredients that make normal beans so windy. So, using traditional techniques, he's created a new bean.
I've been interested in using traditional methods which are well tried, and there are hazards associated with using modern methods like the use of radiation and biotechnology, whereas with a bit of sealing wax and a bit of string, you can use old-fashioned methods.
So, Colin, why do you call them prim beans?
Well, many people's maiden aunts mightn't want to eat beans for dinner, and people often think of maiden aunts as being rather prim and proper ladies, so we thought we'd call our first two beans prim and proper. But try them for yourself. We'd like you to come in. Susan's been cooking some.
Right, I'd love to. Why not?
Right.
Jolly good. Thank you very much. Here we go. My first taste of Dr. Leakey's prim beans, scientifically proven to neutralise nasty niffs. There we are. And you were right, Susan. They taste really very, very good indeed.
Good.
Now, how long will it take, Colin, for me to find out whether the science works?
Well, if you had a problem, it would arise between about 5 and go on until about 10 hours. But I'd expect you to have a quiet night with these.
Here's to a silent night. Well, that's it for this week, I'm afraid. But we're going to leave you with a magical musical moment from our archives.
And it's at times like this that I'm immensely grateful I never sang or played anything on Tomorrow's World. But Kieran Prenderville did. Good night.
Good night.
For my finale tonight, I'd like to play a little number off my latest album, a number I freely adapted from an insignificant original. And all the sounds you're about to hear were created in here. Hope you like it.
Hello.
Here's Michael.
Magic.
Life in airport. Anita, will she ever let her hair down?
The Latchman flag, I'm sure, would never appear on a pair of boxer shorts.
Michelle, will she get through?
She wasn't a happy lady, was she?
Jeremy, cool-handed troubleshooter.
They're unbelievable. It's almost as though time is of no consequence.
All together in airport at these times on BBC World.
Next on BBC World, the World News.
over 150 million cars in Europe. And the drivers suffer from stress. But not always. Bugatti, Aston Martin and Ferrari, the exception to every rule. Jeremy Clarkson's Top Gear special at these times on BBC World.
You know, I'm 74 years old. They still think I'll throw the first punch.
But the deaths my father lived with must have been the deaths of the people that he loved.
People sometimes ask me whether I'm having a midlife crisis, but it seems to me that every day is a crisis.
A new guest every day in the Hardtalk interview. After the news on BBC World.
This is BBC World, keeping you informed 24 hours a day.
Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Anita McNaught. The headlines: warnings of violence unless a solution is found to the occupation by Jewish families of 2 buildings in Arab East Jerusalem. The UN General Assembly opens its annual session with the main focus on internal reforms and the debts owed to it by the US. And news of a breakthrough in negotiations on the future status of the Western Sahara. Israeli officials have proposed a compromise deal to try to end the crisis caused by the occupation of 2 houses in East Jerusalem by Jewish settlers. But there's so far no sign of the settlers leaving. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has cancelled a planned visit to Romania in order to deal with the crisis.
The settlers have been here for 2 days and show no signs of leaving. They say they should be allowed to live anywhere they want in Jerusalem. The 2 buildings they're living in are owned by a Miami-based Jewish millionaire who plans to build more homes for Jews on the edge of this Arab neighborhood. The situation has embarrassed the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, even though Palestinians accuse Israel of involvement in the takeover. If he forces the settlers out, he'll lose the backing of right-wing groups that make up the bulk of his support. He also risks alienating US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who only last week had urged him not to take actions that would anger the Palestinians. Mr. Netanyahu is waiting for a ruling by the Attorney General, Eliakim Rubinstein, on whether he can expel the settlers by invoking national security. Palestinian leaders are now stepping up their pressure, warning of certain violence if the settlers don't leave. Philip Lote, BBC News.
Well, from Jerusalem, I'm now joined on the telephone by the BBC's Lise Doucette. Lise, Jewish settlers have been moving in and out of disputed areas for years. Why is this neighbourhood so sensitive?
Well, every time there is that kind of a situation in which Jewish families move into Arab areas, there is a lot of dispute and controversy and warnings of violence if the families stay. In this case, they have moved into an Arab neighborhood in East Jerusalem at a time when the Palestinians are saying that any kind of bid to build on land in Jerusalem is a violation of their peace deal. So this is what makes it particularly controversial.
Should the Israeli government have seen this coming? After all, the houses were, it seems, legitimately purchased through